Thank you.
Green folder. Okay. I wanted to welcome everybody to the.
Can you use the microphone?
The mic here.
Yep, there should be mics.
Alrighty, we'll start over again. I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 13th meeting of the Planning Board. It is 7:03, and the first item on our agenda is a request from the Hingham Public Schools, the Hingham High School Athletic Complex, 17 Union Street, map lot 90-0-112, 100-0-63, and 100-0-61, and 101-0-8. A request for waiver of site plan review and modifications of the site plan review conditions, use permit, and the Hingham High School parking and traffic plan for large events. What I'd like to do in terms of our format for the evening is typically the applicant would present first. I would then like to ask for any clarification questions from the planning board. I'd like to then hear from other public officials in the town. And then I'd like to open it up to the audience and abutters to make their presentations and gather as much information as we can. We have an hour, just under an hour. We have another hearing scheduled at 8. So if we could all be as concise as possible in your presentations. I'd like to welcome the applicant to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ray Estes, 92 Fort Hill Street for the school committee. We're here tonight, and I brought copies of the narrative that was attached to the application for the modification of conditions, as well as a marked set of conditions reflecting the changes that are being requested as compared to the conditions attached to the original site plan approval decision from March 2 years ago. By all accounts, the high school athletic improvement project, phases 1 and 2, has been a great success. Since these facilities became coming online in 2012 with the track and tennis courts, the multi-purpose field in October of 2013, and later the concession and facilities building and site improvements, everything has really gone just as advertised, I think, and it's been a great addition to both the high school facilities and the community at large. The goal was always to provide an improved athletic experience for the high school and the entire community, being a good neighbor all the way. And I think we've done just that, providing both a useful and aesthetically pleasing result. Regulation and oversight is certainly necessary. Although we found through the course of using the facilities over the past 12 to 18 months that some of the restrictions imposed by the conditions are a little burdensome, and in some cases perhaps unintentionally could restrict equitable enjoyment of the facilities by some female athletes. Just wanted to point out that the school committee has taken this matter up at numerous committee meetings. We've not taken a formal vote to revise the usage policy that we adopted in January of 2013, nor do we intend to in the foreseeable future. We may, after these proceedings are concluded, revisit that. We certainly, as I said, discussed it at length on more than one occasion recently. So over the last 18 months of use, we've learned what has worked well using the facilities and what minor adjustments seem appropriate at this point to enhance and improve the usefulness of the facilities in a very reasonable way, we suggest. And the requests are simple and fall into 3 categories. Adjustment to restrictions relative to high school team use, youth organization use, and large event planning. Here with me tonight, Margaret Conity, our athletic director, Sue Rizzo on behalf of Hingham Youth Football. Those are the primary areas that we're seeking to make adjustments, and they will be able to speak in a couple of minutes. In addition, I note that both the Chief and Deputy Chief of Police are here. I know that Chief Perino has submitted a letter in connection with our request for modification of the large event planning situation, and I think you'll find that we agree with respect to his recommendation. The changes generally relative to high school use would allow the optimal practice scheduling and equity among all sports relative to the use of amplified sound, and particularly for goal announcements throughout games for all genders. Other adjustments pertain to the ability to serve as host site to other teams in tournaments and exhibitions, and general flexibility of use. Changes relative to use by youth organizations are limited, as I said, to Hingham Youth Football. They approached me at different times over the past year, and in fact leading up to the original approval, about a couple of changes they would hope could get made. One of them is relative to the use of amplified sound for play-by-play during football games, something that Hingham Youth Football had historically when it played games on the adjacent Michelson Field on the grass field. Once they started playing on the turf field, because of the conditions imposed, play-by-play wasn't allowed. Second, the ability to start games on Sunday in September 30 minutes earlier rather than 12 o'clock, 11:30. With regard to large event planning and parking, the only request is that the specific requirement in the conditions of 6 to 8 detailed officers for all events be lifted in favor of the practice that has occurred throughout the past year, and I think the Chief's letter indicates as much, which is consultation between the police department and the athletic director about the appropriate staffing for an event on an event-by-event basis, and then a decision by the police department based on all circumstances that are appropriate, and we think that's the right procedure rather than a set number of detailed officers. Leave it to the discretion of the police department in consultation with the athletic director. So at this time, I would ask Margaret Connerty to come up and speak specifically about the high school uses. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
Hi, Margaret Connerty, 15 Daly Road. It's been a while since I've stood before you, and I can only say that last time I was here, it was only our imaginations that were allowing us to envision what has become a reality. And the facility that we have, I think all will agree, is really something very special. And thank goodness we have it after the type of winter we've had. It's been great to be able to put the kids on the synthetic field. My grass fields, they're still not lined, but we're getting there. It's just been a very special facility. The baseball and softball fields have been great in terms of the amount of snow we've had, the way it is drained. We had our actually first game on the baseball field today, so that's kind of a special, significant passage into the spring. We know we're there. And so just to try and talk to you a little bit about some of the usage policy and where I feel I'd like to see a little bit of a change. I'll start first with the time that the lights. Currently, our lights are on until 8:30 Monday through Friday, with the exception of the 3 football games in the fall, which Friday night football begins at 7 o'clock at night. Just so you understand, we belong to the Patriot League, and our games, if it's going to be a night game, the start time for that game is 6 o'clock. That doesn't change. My request is, can we move from 8:30 to 9 o'clock when needed? And so you might say, well, so what does that mean? Why it's very helpful to me, especially in the fall, I have a field hockey team, a girls' soccer, a boys' soccer, and a football team, all trying to get on that field. A 2-hour practice would be 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 9. And that's the simple math of it all. In the spring, I'm just right now finalizing our spring schedule for this facility. And it's challenging in that I mean, we only have girls and boys lacrosse that have to share that field, and so that's pretty easy. But I have my youth soccer and youth lacrosse all trying to get on it as well. And so right now, currently, we'll take one day where youth lacrosse can get on it and one day youth soccer. What I would envision that perhaps we'd be able to spread that out a little bit more evenly. And just a brief overview of since the lights have gone up, in the I believe it was fall of 2013 when we started them, we had a possibility of having the lights on 43 times. In reality, we only had them on 50% of the time. When we went to spring, we had the lights were on till 8:30, and we used out of a possible 67 times that we could have had the lights on, we used lights 2/3 of the time. And then this fall, we used lights 83% of the time. In terms of, we've always had them out at the appropriate times. I set the lights weekly, and I set them for 8:30 at night. If a practice, once a practice ends or a game ends, if it's a game, I'm there. And once the teams have left the field and the custodians have come out, clean the area, clean the bathrooms, then the lights will be shut off. The same after a practice. Sometimes practices might end between 8:15, and the custodians just need a little time, so they're not trying to clean up in the dock, and so the lights would, are set to go off at 8:30, and they have. Actually, they've gone off sooner when necessary. One of the documents that I handed out, I highlighted all the times that we did shut them out earlier, and the reason I did that, I just think it indicates that we're not trying to, we're trying to be a good neighbor. We're trying to make sure when no one's using it to shut the lights off. I think early on I had there was a glitch. When you're working with multiple groups, and I don't mean just my coaches, but with the youth coaches, if someone leaves the facility early, and I'm trying to make sure they text me so I will know. I spend a lot of time there, but I don't spend my entire life there. So if a group leaves early, I need to know, and just text me, and I can shut the lights off from my phone, which is a great thing. And so the rationale is just that to go to 9 o'clock, and I want to make it very clear, I am not changing game times. This isn't so I can make a later game. Our Patriot League, we have our rules, and I want it to be, a 6 o'clock game, and 7 o'clock for football. I'm not trying to increase more football games. At my last meeting, I explained that in the football season, prior to playoffs, this coming year we have 3 home games, and next year we will have 4 home games. And you can always count on one of them to be a homecoming, and that will be on a Saturday. On the 4-game year, we also have Thanksgiving, and that won't be a night game either. So, I mean, it's pretty. I think it's pretty limited in the amount of time in using it. We've also, in terms of building this facility, we've put in state-of-the-art lights where everything was, we dotted our I's, crossed our T's, made sure the light, the spillage of light was great for, so it isn't spilling over excessively into the neighbor's yard. We also bought a sound system that was state-of-the-art. Rather than what was previous, we had, I think, 2 big speakers that just blared. We have multiple speakers. It's appropriate. We've we've talked a lot about it. If you recall, there's a governor on the system where it can only be held to a certain volume standard, and that's and again, that's something that we use to the letter of the law. When I move on here, because I'm talking about sound, what was it, 2 years ago? Time flies. But when we were discussing all of this, it was it was a source of emotion and anxiety, and I think that. And I could understand that because it had never been before in this town. But I think that now that we've lived with it, my request for sound is that on our games, during the week, we only announce starting lineup and we announce goals. And there's a 7:30 shut-off time. But if I have a 6 o'clock game, for field hockey, that's not an issue. For boys and girls soccer, it is. That game will typically end at, if it starts right at 6, it's going to end at 7:40. And so when someone scores at 7:32, we can't announce that person's name. And to me, it's most appropriate just to till the game ends. And the game will be over 7:40, 7:45. And so I would just like to be able to have sound till the end of the game. Let's see. I think from there, I'll echo what Ray Estes said about determining the amount of police per event. We have a resource officer in the school. Actually, he helps coach. We have a great relationship. We talk about upcoming games, what we expect for fan base. Does the other school travel well? Will we have a big crowd? Is this a meaningful game? Those are all the things that help. And then the resource officer speaks to the chief, and they determine they determine the amount of police. And I think that's the appropriate way. That's what we do with indoor sports as well. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Margaret. Are there other folks from the committee who'd like to speak?
Susan Rizzo, 17 Harvard Drive, Hingham Youth Football Board, and the SNAP Special Needs Athletic Board. So what we asked for in the document is to say to increase the time to start till 11:30. All the 21 other teams that we play all start at 11. And when they come to Hingham in September, we currently start at 12. And it's graduated. In October, we start at 11:30. And in November, we're allowed to start at 11. So we would like to ask just for the month of September to start the games at 11:30. So just a half an hour. Not move all the way up to the 11 like all the other teams, but just for that half hour. It just makes it easier for the teams traveling and scheduling, also for the other towns that have teams traveling. So that was the first request. The second request is to reinstate the play-by-play. We had play-by-play for the past 25-plus years at the Hingham High School when it was a lot closer to the Downing Street, and the sound system was much louder for them. And now with the new system, it's much less, amplified and much more contained to this. And play-by-play is part of the league and is part of what we've been doing for Hingham Youth Football for years. And I just want to say that it's not constant. It's not like the professional footballs. It's really some information about the teams. We have the national anthem, player announcements, and then some plays are called. Certainly not every play is called. If there's a big run or a score, there is, because a lot of times there's not a lot of scoring with some of the younger teams. So it's really big plays and things like that. It's not constant. When we say play-by-play, it's not constant, everything that's going on in the game. So that's really all that we're asking for, is because it was taken away during this field project when we were reevaluating everything, but it was without cause. We had it, and we said, okay, we'll take a look at it with so many meetings and so many things going on with the project. They took a step back to look at it. So we would just like to ask the committee to look at that for us and on behalf of Hingham Youth Football.
Can I ask you a question about the, I guess there was, I had heard that there was music and other, the reason that it was taken away, was it because there was music playing, or was
The
it?
reason it was taken away was only because of the field project. So it was not taken away other than the first year, because they took down the stands and they took down the booth. So the first season, when the turf was being built, they had taken the stands and that away. And then last year, it was the 1 year, see how everything goes and everything like that. So no. And the music is, we play the national anthem and the play-by-play. But the play-by-play would only be if we have an announcer for that game. So they're not professional, they're parent volunteers, and some parents, they'll do it and some they won't. Also, in the past, they've had high school students that participate in some of those projects at school, and it gives them an opportunity to do that. Like the videography, we had one person tape the games. They were a high school student, and they worked with HCAM, and it was something they want to do when they go to college. So it gives them an opportunity. And there's things that there's rules on guidelines and what you can say and what you can't say. You don't announce a player's name if they make a penalty. It's against a team and things like that. But it's minimal. It's not really constant chatter. We're not doing advertisements. We're not announcing, pick up the trash is about the only other announcement other than what's going on that we have. But that was not taken away, and there would not be a plan to do music other than the cheerleading team at the halftime. They play music, and they did that last year with a little portable one. So they just like to put that on the PA.
Sure.
I just have a question on just looking at the chart that we have here.
Yep.
It says that you want to increase the time on Saturday from 4 to 9, twice per season for Hingham Youth Football.
No, that's what we have right now.
That's what you have right
We
now.
have- So,
Well, right now you have 4 to 8, but you want to increase it to 9.
well, the 9 o'clock would be similar to the high school, and again, that's for the to make sure that the custodian, because a few times when we were there, the lights did go off, so it's sort of to keep it consistent. But the games start at 4. We're not changing the start times of the game. And again, all the other games in the league really start at 5. So again, it's an hour later. It's an hour earlier in Hingham, but all the other towns, the games start at 5. So we're not. That's what we have right now. We're not asking for a change.
Right, but I was commenting on the 9, 8 to 9. So during both Saturday and Sunday, you want back-to-back play-by-play for both those days? All day?
Not well during the game times.
Okay. So right now it says, for Saturday, it's 4 to right now, it's 4 to, I can't figure out which is 8 and which is 9, but it's twice per season. You want it every Saturday now, or you still want to keep that? Let me just,
Yeah, no, so Hingham Youth Football gets 2 Saturdays
Okay.
out of the season, so that's it.
Okay.
And, for instance, last season, when they had the Saturday games, it worked out with the scheduling. We didn't have any that next Sunday. So it could be that, but
Okay.
in this past season, we didn't have that situation.
so right now on Sunday, you start at 12, you'd like to start at 11:30
Yeah.
in September,
Yes.
and you'd like to have the play-by-play every Sunday. You haven't had it.
We haven't had it, but
Okay.
the previous, 25 years plus, we did have it, yep.
All right, I just,
Yeah.
the chart is hard for me to follow,
Okay,
so thank you.
sorry, Okay. Any,
Thank you.
Chairman, if I could just clarify one point. As I understand it, from speaking to youth football folks, a set of 3 games typically takes about 5 hours. And if you note, the lights are allowed to be on until 9 p.m., but the amplified sound was to be shut off at 8 p.m., and that was because play-by-play was not going to be allowed. And as you might recall during the discussion permitting process, that it was determined that if you had the team announcements, the national anthem, and pretty much after halftime, you wouldn't need amplified sound anymore because there wasn't going to be play-by-play because it was being restricted. So it was agreed, and in fact, the school committee adopted a policy that indicated that 8 p.m. was an acceptable time. But if you're reinstituting play-by-play, which is what Hingham Youth Football has indicated it would like, then it would be until the end of the games, which could go as late as 9 o'clock when the lights are allowed to be on. That's.
I had a couple of questions. Relative to the end time, if the proposed end time is 9 o'clock, does that mean the end of the cleanup time and the game is actually over 15 or 20 minutes before that? Or is the end of the evening the end of the game at, proposed at 9, and then the subsequent cleanup time where the lights would be on. Sure.
My games will be over far before 9 o'clock. The 9 o'clock for me is for a practice. And even with the night football games, the game will start at 7. Typically it's over with by 9:15, and everyone leaves, and we clean up immediately.
Shall I ask if other board members have a question? Other board members?
Yes, would other board members like questions? Judy, Walter? No?
I do. First, thanks everybody for coming. I can't help myself. To get ready for tonight, I rewatched our February 2013 meeting, and I'm really delighted, actually, that kind of that conversation, which was so hard and so long, really kind of yielded a fruitful outcome, I think, for the town. And that's because the school committee and the planning board and all of you worked together on this. So I also watched the last school committee meeting, and there was a sense in that meeting that, and I quote, we were essentially ignored by the planning board. And I just want to set that straight, because the permit that we ended up with started with the school committee, and we could use like a baseball or a softball analogy. The pitch, we're the catchers. Some of the stuff stayed, and some of it was like, not so much. And that was all informed by the people who were sitting in the room, who are everybody else on the team. And so when we talk about teams, I feel like we are on the same team. We are not on separate teams. So I just want to, I couldn't think that the planning board had ignored the school committee on this permit. My questions, though. Margaret, changing the amplified sound is the one big question I have, from twice a week to 5 days a week wasn't something that I remember talking about last year, and I'm just interested in just a little bit more about why 5 days from 2. Was it because, there were people who wanted to play who weren't able to play, or how did the numbers shoot up so high?
I think that it's, if we have, which we don't have 5 games a week, but although I will say, coming off the winter, this particular spring, not that we do sound system for baseball, but baseball and softball could be playing 5 days a week. Take a look at the fall season. When a typical schedule would be when my girls' soccer is away, my boys are home, and the next night field hockey could be home. They could be playing on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and so if that occasion happens, someone is without sound. And keep in mind, this is not a play-by-play. This is the anthem, the introductions, and goal scoring.
But the request is for more than double what we've had so far, right?
Well, I think it's just that the option would be that we could turn sound on when we have a game.
Right. 5 nights.
If in fact it were 5 nights.
Right. Okay.
I can, I seriously doubt we would have a 5-night week.
Right. Okay. And then another question for you. On the cleanup, I understand they need to keep the lights on, but, and to me, quite frankly, going from 8:30 to 9 with just the lights seems, I don't know, I'd love to hear from people here about how that would impact them, but it seems pretty reasonable. But do you need to keep the field lights on during the cleanup time? Aren't they on separate,
You can't put, turn off one, it's either on or off. And our custodians will, they walk the perimeter, lock it up, pick up, trash or whatever, and make sure the bathrooms are clean. And so,
So the highlights are on the same switch as the
Yes.
facility lights?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. And thank you. And then just my third question is just on the, I know that there's an issue of gender equity here, and I'm just wondering why Hingham Youth Football is the only then youth league that has this option, or are the youth sports not regulated by Title IX?
oh, I would think they are, but I'm unclear on that.
So the only request from youth organizations for any modifications came from youth football, and it didn't have anything to do with Title IX. The Title IX issue was the high school.
So are the youth not regulated by Title IX?
No, it's generally college and high school athletics.
Oh, okay. I'm just curious because if we're here scrubbing this and trying to make it right, if we're taking off football from the high school language, I'm just wondering why we're not taking it off from the youth language also in the permit.
Yeah.
There are girls that play Hingham Youth Football. So it's open to boys and girls, 2nd grade through 8th grade, and they are girls that have played and keep playing. Also, it's to benefit the cheerleaders, who they have girls and they cheer at the halftime, so it includes them. But there could be boy cheerleaders as well. So it's open to both, for both cheer and football.
Okay,
And
thank you.
there are girls playing currently.
Okay.
I had one question, Margaret. On the narrative, I understood that the rationale to go to 9 o'clock was to have 3 sequential practices. And I'm looking at the sound, and the sound is typically until 8 o'clock, but the use of the field is 5 nights rather than 2. So at 8 o'clock, first of all, is the sound used at the practices at the same level at the games? Never used at the practices?
Never.
So it's only at a game, and if the game lasted till 9, then the sound would turn off at 8, based on the
Right.
plan.
If a game lasted till 9, there would have been something terribly wrong. Something went wrong.
I see.
Either
So
an injury that required ambulance and, something that would have delayed the game.
Is the actual stop time of the games basically a certain amount of time before the 9 o'clock, and going
yeah.
to 9 is only a contingency?
No, the 9 is more to be able to have a practice.
I see.
And no, the games typically end anytime between 7:15 and 7:45.
Okay.
It's to be able to, if, say, field hockey has a game, then football might say, well, I'd like to be able to get on the field for a practice. And you really need more than, an hour and
Okay.
20 minutes to have a practice.
So the potential increase is really if the games are increased to 5 nights, then the sound would be increased accordingly to the 5 nights.
Yeah.
If I'm
but
seeing this clearly.
Keep in mind, we typically only have, each team typically only has 3 night games during the course of the season. So field hockey, we're talking about 12 night games altogether in the fall. And football is on Friday night. The others would be, and we're talking about spread out over an 8-week schedule. So to play 5 games in a week is rather, would have to be some horrible weather, and it would happen at the very end of the season where you would need to get all of your games in. We have certain dates that your season has to end, and if you don't play those games, it's considered a loss. So that would be the only time, but I just don't foresee that happening. I can tell you in my career it has never happened. So, okay?
Go ahead.
Margaret, can I just ask you a couple of questions? Sorry. Is it possible to have an end time? It says until the end of games, typically 8. Can there be an absolute? Because then that
At
seems...
8 o'clock, yeah. I mean...
Well, I'm not saying it has to be 8, but could there be but not beyond the hour of?
Right. I mean, that to me is ample time for us.
And is it also possible to sort of, in the amplification, add that there'll be no music except for the halftime?
I believe we have that.
Okay, it's not in here, but that'd be good.
Be in the details here.
But you could, if I may, so right now, we only use, there's only a dance routine for the football games typically. They typically don't have them for the other high school teams. I suppose there could, theoretically, in the future, be an opportunity for the dance team to do a halftime show for a soccer game, for a field hockey game. So if you limited that, you would not allow the other teams to have that same equivalent benefit. And just to point out, the reason why the language was written the way it was until the end of games was so that it was focused on the games, whether they be 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or 5 days a week, not to say every day of the week, just whenever there were games, that the use of sound be extended so that the goals scored could be announced until the end of those games. And as Margaret said, typically they end around 7:30, 7:40. Certainly by 8 o'clock, that's sufficient time.
And one other point, you might not realize, but spring season has started, and we've played about 4 lacrosse games, and we have not used sound yet, at all.
Before you go, can I ask you to just explain one other change that you guys haven't touched on, but's on this request, and I just want to make sure everybody hears it, is in the notes underneath the 1, 2, 3 that tell you about the lights and sound each season. The first footnote says, refers to the postseason play. And so there's a little bit of a change, tournament or playoff games. There's a little bit of a change there, and I'd just like to give you the opportunity to explain what that means.
The postseason play is just, the MIAA will tell me, here's where you are playing and here's the time you're playing. And I don't really get to negotiate that very well. And so, I just, in all of our discussions leading up to this policy, postseason play was always not a part of this because we're very restricted, and I think that the school committee, if I get a call saying, okay, Hingham's playing tomorrow at 6 o'clock at night, I don't think the school committee can go and run and have a meeting over something like this. I just think it's important that, okay, it's a tournament game. Here's when we're playing. This is the time and the place.
So this change basically just changes the decision-making from the school committee to you, which is what you just described. But it also says it was for Hingham High School tournament or playoff games, and then added is other games or tournaments scheduled by high school sanctioning bodies such as MIAA. Does that mean that there will be games played here that Hingham is not playing in?
It could be. I mean, for years and years, other schools have hosted us, and it's we could be hosting a tournament game where we wouldn't necessarily be playing, and it wouldn't necessarily be a lot of games. It would be, for instance, the tournament directors have seen our facility and are really very impressed with it, as they should be, and gratefully they've said, we'd love to be able to host sometime, but we want, to let you get your legs underneath you to make sure everything's okay with that. Could we host a game from time to time? Yes, we could. And the benefit, actually, it's something that is, it's prideful, really. You're kind of showing off your town a little, and it helps. In terms of a financial thing, your booster groups can run a concession stand, make a little money that way. But it's nice. It's well policed. It's a nice honor to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, sure.
I just want to say that I share Judy's concern about the increase of the nights per week, that we're more than doubling it. So I would love to hear from the neighbors and how they feel that will impact them. And you know, the 8:30 to 9, 9 just seems late to me to be impacted by lights and sound. But again, I think that the people who can speak most to that are the neighbors.
It's not 7.
The sound goes to 8.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it could be. I mean, there's no end time, so that makes me nervous. It's typically until the end of the game, 8 o'clock. It'd be great to see an end time there. Because to me, that means it can go on as long as the lights are on.
It's 8 is the end time. There's no sound.
Okay, then the schedule needs to say, at this point, it doesn't say that, so that's good to know. Thank you.
The language was done that way so we could have the discussion here. It purposely was not meant to set a specific end time so that we have the discussion and then what seems to be the most appropriate under the circumstances based on what you're hearing from Margaret. And you know, what we've heard from her is she'd like to have it until the end of games. Typically, as she said, that's 7:30, 7:40, 7:45, something like that. So when I did this and sent it in, I said, okay, 8 o'clock, we'll round off, we'll have the discussion, see what's appropriate.
Could I, at this juncture, at 7:43, could I see that we could have the police department, the chief, kind of give his presentation and summary, and then I'd like to open it up to the abutters, if we could, and neighbors.
Good evening.
Welcome, Chief.
Police Chief. I, too, was watching the school committee meeting, and I saw that, you know, they were concerned about the amount of detail officers. I did get, you know, Dot Geller did come up, and we did have a meeting about it after that. And I received the document that the 6 to 8 officer financial strain on the department. The letter I gave you is the results of the past season football games. And the only game that we actually used 8 officers was the homecoming game, and that was during the day. And that was because they had activities from morning right to the late afternoon. And as you look, as the season went on, we actually started decreasing the numbers. And this is with cooperation of Margaret, myself, and feedback from Officer Ford, the school resource officer. And so as the season went on, we noted that less officers were actually needed. Okay, there were 7 other games with soccer and field hockey when 1 officer was assigned for the night games. And again, as you can see, we worked with the athletic department to assign as appropriately needed. The thing I want to stress is because of the location of our field and the concerns of the neighbors, we may need to have more details than other towns in our league, and because we don't want any of the issues spilling over into the neighborhoods. So just for the record, my recommendation is the requirements for police details at Hingham High School field would be the discretion of the police chief working together with the athletic department to determine the needs of the whatever the event is. And I'll just tell you, you know, in 2 weeks we have town meeting, and I will be assigning 6 to 8 officers outside. You know, so but I don't think we need to have in there that they have to have 6 to 8 officers. I think it should just be with the discretion of Margaret and the police chief working together. But, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And in your role as the life safety officer in the town, you know, I think it's absolutely essential that your discretion is key in this, working, of course, in conjunction with the people planning the events. Thank you. I think what I'd like to do is open it up to neighbors and abutters. If you could come to the microphone and name and address for the record. Welcome comments at this point. Who'd like to go first?
Rosemary Arthur, 26 Floret Circle, and I'm actually here addressing the change in the hours. I know it's another little bit of erosion into a Sunday morning, just because a lot of churches are trying to ease the burden on families, making the choice between sport and the spiritual development of their children, which is, I figure, just as important. So that's what I'm here to give a protest to, the fact that it would be adding more Sundays when it would be moved earlier. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Ben Hux. I live at 34 Downing Street. I am the house directly behind the fields. You see him, the big white one that was cleared when the brush was cleared. I'd like to come up and say a few points. Personally, I think some of my neighbors are going to talk as well. I think I'd like to echo some of the sentiments about the Fields project and what it's done for the town. I grew up in the Midwest where high school football was a way of life. Not quite as bad as Texas, but it was pretty intense. And so it was a lot of fun to take my two young kids, 2 and 4, over to the games when they were before their bedtimes. But we did enjoy some times last year. I think you spoke about it being a team process, and we're a team, and there's a lot of components to this. I'm new to town, and I'm a little frustrated that when this most recent proposal was put forth, there wasn't even a, hey, let's walk down the abutters streets and knock on some doors and leave some notes and say, hey, how's it going? How's it been working? Here's what we'd like to do, and here's why we'd like to do it. It's we fought for it, our needs or our wishes the first time, and now it feels like we're right back to where we were and trying to do it again without so much as a conversation. We talk about some of the language that's in here, and it's typically games are over by 7:45. Well, what's been typical has been based on the scheduling restrictions we had, because we've never had lights. So if lights have to go off by 8, we're going to schedule games, earlier. And as the lights increase, then the typical end times conceivably and reasonably would increase and go later as well. So I don't think that we can go on what's typical now, because we're completely throwing that out the door with the changes that we're asking for. Additionally, there's a lot of vague language in here. I think that there's some stuff that seems somewhat reasonable, but to open it up to any high school sanctioning body for any game at any time, that doesn't have to, the way the language reads, doesn't have to abide by any of the restrictions that we're discussing on the first page, seems dangerous and seems risky. And any delays or anything that's outside of our, meaning the athletic director's control, we have to accommodate for, the fields have to accommodate for. And so there's several examples where it's way too open-ended, and we've touched on some of them, there's no restrictions, there's no definite guidelines, it's typicals and hypotheticals and everything else. So I think it's tough to really have a complete opinion on this when I feel that so much of it is still, undefined. So that's all I have to say, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would you like to?
Just like to respond to the wiggle room or whatever of the game times changing. We belong to the Patriot League. We have set times for our games. In the afternoon, it's 3:30 if you can get there on time, or 4. For the evening games, it's a 6 o'clock game. Okay, in the winter in basketball, it's a 6:30 game. So we're not pushing the games aside. And as far as high school governing body, it is the MIAA. That is the only body that governs us. That it's not like anyone can come out of the blue. It's Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, and I think they have about 400 plus members across the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Any more? Sure. Come up, please.
Hi, Michael Vaughn, 52 Union Street. I appreciate what the last gentleman just said about vague language, so I wanted to bring up an example of vague language, I think. Number 6. Field lights will remain off when the field is not in use or scheduled to be used, meaning that if nobody showed up for the practice, you can leave the lights on is what I'm taking out of that, because I don't know why you need to add that bit in or schedule to be used. There was an instance last Thursday night in which there was nobody on the field. I saw at 6:30. At 10 minutes to 7, the lights came on, because they're scheduled to come on at certain times, depending on sunlight, I believe, is the sense I get. But nobody on the field. Lights remained on until 7:45. Finally, somebody turned them off. But the lights should not be on if nobody's on the field. That should be simple. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So the recent incident that Mr. Vaughn referred to was unfortunate. We apologize for that. Margaret had the flu and was unable to get the lights off. And the reason why that language was added specifically was actually following the look-back hearing that we had a couple of months ago, and leading up to that, we had gotten word from some neighbors, or one neighbor in particular, concerned about seeing that the lights were on a number of occasions, particularly when it was raining, and there was nobody on the field. And that was explained that, and I think Margaret spoke to it earlier, that she tries to coordinate, particularly with the youth organizations, that if you're going to cancel practice, if you're going to leave early, text me, let me know so I can turn off the lights. Not all of the folks who use the field have been vigilant about doing that, and there were a handful of occasions over the past year, unfortunately, where the team left the field early or canceled practice at the last minute. The lights were left on until the assigned 8:30 time, and Margaret wasn't aware to turn them off earlier. And we certainly apologize for that, and that's why the language was put in there specifically to address that issue.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jane Marabasi from 8 Fontainebleau Drive. I'm a neighbor. Actually, I've been a neighbor for 19 years now. I moved from Pleasant Street, where I lived for 14 years, over to Fontainebleau for 5 years now. So I've lived in the neighborhood for 19 years. I love the neighborhood, and I think that the high school is a great neighbor. I think that the changes made there have all been great. I love the project, Margaret. I think it was a great job. The lights don't bother us at all, as far as I'm concerned, on Fontainebleau Drive. The sound system doesn't bother us at all. I think it's a great addition to walk to the stadium over there, to see the lights. I think even just once in a while hearing the noises, the stadium, it just is a piece of America to listen to the cheers and the kids playing on the fields over there. I think it's a great addition to the town, and it's a great feeling to hear that on a Friday night when you're sitting at home once in a while, if you catch a coming home and you can get out of your car and listen to it. So I have nothing but positive, great things to say about the whole thing. And I think that the small amount of addition that they're asking for is a very small thing, and I trust Margaret and the school to do the right thing with these small things they're asking for. And I trust you guys to keep the restrictions in balance with them, and I don't think they're asking for too much at this point. I really think it's a good idea to give a little bit more after waiting this long. This past year has been a great experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Hi, I'm Kate Heffernan. I'm a Downing Street resident at 40 Downing, which is also next to my neighbor Ben Hucks and right behind the field. And I want to echo what was just said. From my perspective, it's been a very positive experience, and a large part of that is due to how careful the use policy was and how thoughtful the restrictions and limitations were that were put into place. And so while many of my neighbors and I feel that some of the requests are entirely reasonable, I think the thing I'd like to stress is the importance of predictability and of knowing what those limits look like and having pretty concrete parameters to that. And so I echo my neighbor's statement that the ambiguity in some of the current proposals is what is most concerning to me. I mean, we want to know when the lights are going out. We want to know when the sound is going off. And in particular, I'd like to stress the sound. I mean, really, the lights have not been intrusive from my perspective, and the increases in that regard I don't have a personal problem with, and I speak for myself in that respect, and not necessarily my whole street, but that's not of concern. But I think the amplified noise really is. I mean, it is something we absolutely hear, and it's something that in the evening, particularly Monday through Thursday with young children going to bed, to have that be uncertain as to when that's going off and to have that extend too far into the evening is something that is a concern to us, and it's something that, you know, it would be helpful to know there are some set limits around. And, you know, lastly, I would also like to say, and, you know, I know that sometimes timing and the way things evolve, it's not always possible, but it really would be nice to have this be a conversation with the school committee and with the neighboring streets, and to feel as though this is going to be something that annually we have to be concerned that there's going to be extensions and extensions and extensions to be monitoring. I'd like to know that we just have an open dialogue and that we can really get to a point where we can talk about ways that things need to change or evolutions that need to be considered. And I completely understand that within the past year there's probably aspects of this that need to be tweaked as a result of what has been learned. But that, to me, is something that we could really accomplish probably informally. So I would hope that that would be the case going forward. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Welcome.
Wallace Boyer, 31 Downing. There's a couple things I just need clarity on, because I think it might have changed since my last. One of the biggest issues for us is the change from 2 days a week amplified sound to potentially 5 days a week amplified sound. But what the amplified sound is, I think, is important as well. Right now, 2 days a week, we listen to player introductions and national anthem. The request to go to 5 would include player introductions, national anthem, goal announcements, and a halftime in conjunction with choreographed cheerleading and dance routine. Is that correct? Is that? I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly on that one.
I think the request getting hung up on, will we have sound 5 days a week? I just don't see that. It's what it is when we have a game, we would like to be able to introduce the teams, play the anthem, and announce goals. Now, will our dance team all of a sudden start joining in? They haven't, and I would never say to them, no, you can't do that. But that hasn't been their practice, to say, and to come and do a routine during the week. They do that. They're a performing arts group. They dance at the football games. Suppose we had a particularly big game and they wanted to come and dance. Their routine is never longer than 2 minutes, and if we looked at halftime of a soccer game, that would be at 6:40 at night, not at 9 o'clock, not at 8, anything like that. At a field hockey game, it would be at a field hockey game. It would be at 6:30. So if they came, but I've been here 7 years and they've never come to that type of thing. As far as the sound is more that if we have a game, we would like to be able to announce it. And again, we're talking about each team getting 3 night games over the course of a season.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep, thank you. Okay, so that helps. So I think if the cheerleading and the dance routines usually don't come, I think why request it for a full 5 nights? We would love to see the 2 nights stay and have amplified sound 2 nights a week, and decide if they really don't need the 5 days and they're requesting the 5 days, maybe that gets shortened, and if you don't need it, why request it? That's a little confusing.
Can I follow up on this for just 1 second? Margaret said that there are 12 night games in the fall, and there's 8 weeks to the season. So how many is that? That's 1.5 games per week, right? Which is how I think we probably got to the 2 games per week way back when we did this. Just listening to the neighbors' concerns about having kind of a better handle on what the number of nights, we hear you tonight saying, well, it's never going to be 5, but wanting to put something in writing that just kind of limits it for them, because, would you say 12 nights over the 8 weeks as kind of an outside limit, or not 5 nights a week, but maybe 3 nights? Is there kind of something that would give the neighbors a little bit more security that it's beyond this conversation, that it's really not going to be 5 nights a week for the 8 weeks?
Where I'd like to have some flexibility is if games, when I set a schedule, I try to make, spread it out over the course of the 8 weeks and try to avoid any back-to-back for each team. However, when things get postponed, I would like to have the flexibility. If we're having a game, I can't say, okay, we're playing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. One of you can't have sound, and that's I'm looking for just to have flexibility to, if we have a game, to be able to do what everyone else does, introduce and announce goals.
But would it be unfair to sort of say 14 nights over 8 weeks, just throwing in those extra 2 just in case somebody has to play a do-over or something? Is there a way to put an outside limit on the number in some way, maybe not per week, but per season, just so that the neighbors have a sense of what the number is of nights is going to shape up to be?
I think they have a sense now of what we do. Everything we've done for the past year is pretty much in line with what we're going to continue to do. But should the occasion arise that, hey, we have a game, I'd like to be able to announce it, I can't do it because I announced twice already. Right. That's where it comes up short, and it comes up as an issue if it's if it's a boys game versus a girls game, all of that. And I think, and again, this is not, it's just to recognize what we're doing. And I think what we're doing, we're continuing to do. We're not changing that. Okay.
I don't think what Margaret is requesting is unreasonable. So if we could get to a number that isn't 5 days a week, 'cause it doesn't sound like she's going to need it, then we figure out what that number is. And if we just know that we're not listening to the amplified sound 5 days a week until, sorry, I have to keep this all straight, until 8 p.m., that would be great to know that it was 2, maybe the occasional 3. I think we could all live with that. It's the scare factor of Monday through Friday, every day, amplified sound, potentially till 8. Right. Yes.
But it sounds like that's not the case. It's just how to put that into...
My fear is that if you don't have some sort of guide to what exactly they have to live under, and I actually think Margaret she tries to do the right thing. So this is not a Margaret attack. It's that if you have 5 days open to do something, you will do it, and that is obviously our fear. So if we had a amount of days that we knew it was going to happen, it would at least give us a guideline of knowing that we would only be listening to it 2 days. Someone said tonight that the noise hadn't changed, that the new system the noise was better. The noise is the same. If music plays or if we're listening to games, we hear it just as much. So yes, it's a new system and it's better, but our street hears it like it's in our backyard still. So I just want everyone to understand that. Music is another thing that's worrisome, is that going from just the anthem to So just the player introduction to the anthem and having potentially a choreographed cheerleading or dance routine 5 days a week. And I know it doesn't sound like Margaret wants that, but it's what is requested today. So the music that's another thing that as a street we all thought, okay, we're going to potentially have to hear that until 8 p.m. And I know it's not the whole game, it's a short period of time, but that is something that would be a life changer for us. Again, as you all know, we've got a newborn in 2 months. We've got about 15 kids under 5. So although this isn't late to everyone in this room, it is late to a newborn to have noise. And it's the noise, it's not the lights. I can't stress that enough. The lights have not been an issue for us. And extending this time from 8:30 to 9, I don't see that as a big deal. I don't think it changes our lives any. And I think Margaret is good about making sure those lights are off. I can see it right in every window in my front of my house, and those lights are turned off at 8:30. She does a really good job. I want to echo this, the same as the Hucks, Ben Hucks and Kate, that we would love to have a committee. If we could form a committee with Downing Street Union and the Meadows, and maybe Margaret could be on it, to be a part of the conversations that go on in the school committee. I know some of the school committee members would probably welcome this, but if we were a part of this, I think that we could come to the planning board and be a little bit more on the same page. But we get it, we have to digest it, and then come to you. I think that is a great idea. And then lastly, we are absorbing, obviously we need this field because my kids are on it, I get it, we need it, but our street is absorbing it. And if we could have another field in town that could take some of the brunt of the late nights and the amplified sound. I know that's not your decision to make, but I think it would be wonderful to not have this neighborhood have to, because this is going to increase year after year, and we don't want to fight the system year after year. So, I know the Hingham Sports Partnership's in the room, and I know they're a big part of it, and the school committee. I think that would help us tremendously if we could share the burden somewhere else. So, thank you.
Thanks, Wallace. Could I, at this juncture, okay, go ahead, then I've got to...
Just real briefly,
sure.
The main reason why the application included, essentially extending the halftime show to other teams, that's a Title IX reason. We realized when we walked out of here 2 years ago that there were things in the conditions that were going to be violations, technically, of Title IX. And if we had begun a review by the Office of Civil Rights in 2010, we got that report 2 years later, and we had to provide a formal response. And part of that response was addressing how the new facilities that we were planning and were going to address what were found to be inequities in equivalent experiences. We're not saying they have to be exactly one for one, whatever the boys get, the girls get, but there have to be equivalent experiences. So when we sit here and we're trying to box in the exact number of games, I'm not suggesting there should be more games. We're merely suggesting that the boys' football has play-by-play. That's the way it is for Patriot League. So because the boys' football has play-by-play and they essentially announce touchdowns, then the girls' field hockey team should be able to announce goals for the entirety of the game. As you've heard tonight, those games typically end a little after 7:30, 7:40. We put in there 8 o'clock. If you want to box it in more and put 7:45, I'm sure that's fine. I think when you talk about the number of games, then you start to create a similar situation that we had when we walked out 2 years ago, which was the Friday nights limited to football only, which is really a violation. Because if the girls' field hockey team wanted to have a late game, which they don't because the game started at 6, but if they could, we couldn't do that for them, and that would be a violation. So some of the language in this was really just to kind of protect us from not violating Title IX. Title IX addresses, serves colleges and high schools if they receive federal funding.
So how would putting a limit on the number, to address this issue about amplified sign 5 days a week, how would that go up against Title IX?
So again, it doesn't say 5 days a week. It only says during games. amplified sound to the end of games. So if there were only a game 1 day a week or 2 days a week or 3 days a week, we're talking about till the end of games. It does not say 5 days a week anywhere. So the intention is
Monday through Friday.
that's the period of time that could occur, but it's not for all of the days. This is the same chart that we worked off 2 years ago, and it's not intended to be every day. It's during that period of time, during Monday through Friday. It's until the end of games. So if there's a game on Monday and no games for the rest of the week, it would just be during that one game. If there happens to be 2 or 3 games that week, then it would be during those 3 games.
But you're a neighbor.
Yep.
And you just want to know, more or less, what to expect.
Sure.
And you guys have been great. You put the schedule up and they can see it and all of that. And 10 years from now, you guys aren't sitting here, somebody else is, and they decide there should be a game 5 nights a week with sound 5 nights a week. How do the neighbors know that that's not going to happen if there's no number on this? Like, I understand what you're saying, that this is kind of whatever the high school schedule of games says, but what is the harm, and how does it go against Title IX to just say a total of 20 games a season, any number, just any number, just so that they know what to expect?
I think it would be difficult to come up with that number, and if there are hypotheticals that we could talk about all night where there were cancellations or postponements, and then you had a week where you had to squeeze in games because the end of the season was coming, and you had to have a certain number of games to make the tournament or whatever it was, and you had 2 nights scheduled for boys' games already, and you had to squeeze in 2 or 3 girls' games, and they were going to go beyond the timing. And so maybe you would have 5 nights in 1 week as an anomaly where you might have to have a game and amplified sound calling goals being scored until 7:30 or 7:40. We're suggesting that in that, bizarre instance that probably would never happen, you cannot have a document that restricts that from the possibility, because it would be a violation of Title IX.
We have it. I'm not saying that.
Judy's not asking, she's just saying an outside limit of games. She's not saying you have to have it within 2 nights. If you know there's only 12 night games, then there ought to be an outside limit, and hopefully you'd schedule them in a reasonable amount of time, and there's 2 weeks of rain, and so you have to have a bunch at the end. I mean, that makes sense. So it seems to me that's a reasonable
We're just trying to
request.
listen to what people are
I'm not
saying.
unsympathetic to the neighbors. I'm really not. And in terms of timing, the reason why there wasn't really time to kind of get together and have a lot of meetings about this in advance, because we scheduled the look-back meeting as soon as we could after work was completed, and this was the logical next step, and wanted to get it timely. And this was the opportunity to do that. So there was no intention to leave the neighbors out or not to have a dialogue about it. In fact, I think we've had that dialogue during the last 2 or 3 school committee meetings. And we've tried to be reasonable. We've tried to refine this request as much as possible based on what we think is a reasonable expectation or desire to use based on the last year of use.
Could I do this? We have, we're running out of time. We have an 8 o'clock agenda item scheduled, and we're running a little bit over. What I'd like to do is take perhaps 2 more questions or comments from neighbors and abutters, and then I'd like to chat about our next step. So would 2 more people like to present, and then we could, and then we can talk about our next step? Sure.
Hi, Jeff Carone, 44 Pleasant Street. I'm in a butter. My son is a freshman. He walks out our house at 7:58, walks across the street, and he's in there by 7:59. We're relatively new, and I've got to say that the high school has been great neighbors. We were a little apprehensive moving in across from the high school, but it's been a great experience. There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm that comes from the high school. A couple things that I would like to address is the Friday night, the limitations. I was actually surprised that that the football team was the only team that got 3 games on Friday nights. To think that the girls soccer team won the state championship didn't get the opportunity to play on a Friday night. The boys soccer team didn't get to play on a Friday night. The field hockey team. I think that really needs to be expanded. I was surprised from where we came from how restrictive the regulations were here, and came from a town that was similar demographics. The other thing is expanding the lights to 9 o'clock to give Margaret the ability to have 3 2-hour practices. My son's on the baseball team. Their first 16 practices were inside. Their 17th practice was out on the turf, and they split it with the lacrosse team. There's a big need with the weather that we have here and the conditions. It's such a limited season. The spring season is going to be over in a month and a half. It's not asking that much, I didn't think, to expand the practice time to 9 o'clock and give her a little bit more flexibility so teams can have equal practice time. Thanks.
Thank you. Another? Beth?
I think that the requests of the school department are reasonable. No one knows how many hundreds and hundreds of hours have gone into the planning of this. And I think what they've asked for is a little, just a tiny bit. We spent all this money on these schools, and we're pushing athletics like mad all the time. I feel sorry for the poor parents that are always watching everything, but nevertheless, we've spent all this money, and then we turn around and try to restrict what they can do with the fields. It's silly. I think they should just go along. They were very reasonable requests. That's it.
Thank you. I think we're at a point where this has been a great dialogue, and I think we've learned a lot, and I think everybody who's here participating has learned a lot. We've raised a number of issues have been raised by the neighbors and the abutters, and I think I'm going back to some of the comments that I've heard from some of the folks tonight, that there's been a request that there be more dialogue to establish a kind of participatory committee so that these issues can be vetted once and for all. So what I'd like to suggest is a number of issues have been raised. There's been great input on all sides of the issue. I think we've seen a lot. I'd like to request that perhaps that the school committee could evaluate all this input and essentially return to the board with an official school committee position relative to the specifics and the guidelines and the outside parameters, so that everybody can look at this document and say, okay, it's clear, the guidelines are all resolved, and it's something that is a collaborative effort between the committee and all the neighbors, and then we could meet again with the board, the planning board, and in conjunction with the school committee, and move forward together at that point. We have to move to another hearing on our agenda, and I don't think there's enough time this evening to get through it all. So I put that out on the table.
I think also people who didn't have a chance tonight to speak, please feel free to write the planning board a letter. It's always good to have it in writing anyway, so thank you.
We've received abutter letters from, I think, 5 abutter letters, and I did just want to enter those into the record, if I could find the list, which we need to do for this hearing. Who's got the list? You got the list? Here we go. No? I just had it and I lost it. There's a letter from Michael Vaughn, Downing Street, March 9th, Michael Driscoll, 2 Downing Street, March 10th, Angela Barnard, 30 Downing Street, March 11th, Susan DeLay, 27 Downing Street, 317, and Wallace Boyer, a letter from her and signed by all the homes on Downing Street. I'd like to just enter all those into the record, the public record for this evening's discussion, and I'd like to suggest if we could discuss a rescheduling of the next portion of the hearing.
Well, the applicant would need to request a continuation and extension of time for the hearing because your time frame for action expires May 3rd. So that would be, the applicant would need to request that, and then looking at your upcoming schedule, I don't know what the board was thinking as far as May 4th is pretty full. May 11th, you have nothing scheduled. May 18th, you already have 2 hearings.
Would May 11th, given that it's a light schedule? May 4th, we had a lot on May 4th, if I remember correctly. So would May 11th be a time that would be?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just polled, so I have a quorum of the school committee here. We did call to order at the outset. So we would be amenable and would request a continuance of this hearing for a future date. May 11th is actually the first school committee meeting of the new school committee year. Okay. We'll have 2 new members, and that would not work for us. The 4th is too busy for you. We could be available on the 18th. I think the week after that is Memorial Day.
The 18th, the board has 2 hearings scheduled already, so it's the board's pleasure how long of a time you would want for a conversation.
Would it be horrible to meet on a different night then? That week of May 11th, or you guys wouldn't want to come in 2 nights, would you?
It's hard to schedule that night right now on the fly. I mean, it's certainly possible, but I mean, I don't know that it's necessary to squeeze it in. You know, if it needs to go to the beginning of June.
June 1st. I mean, since the school year is kind of...
That's probably a school committee meeting that night, the June 1st. There's 3 meetings in June, pretty sure.
We could do it at whatever time you want.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
June 1st is better for you? Okay. Is that what, Monday, June 1st? Nothing? Okay.
We would need a written request, though.
Okay, so Ray, we would just need a written request if you could.
And if you guys want to propose a time,
Yeah, we could do that.
you know, that works for you, that's fine with us.
Is the 8th better? Is the 8th better? Hey.
I was trying to make sure you didn't have time this week. And
Maybe the 8th would be better for me.
That's fine.
Oh, no,
right?
that's fine.
I understand.
I think I'll use this.
Sure.
If the board's available June 8th, that's fine.
June 8th, Monday, June 8th. And we could do it first, typically 7 o'clock or whatever time. 7 o'clock works for you? Okay, so if you just write it on the back of a piece of paper, we'd be fine, and that'd be formal enough, I guess. Thank you. When does school end? Is it the 22nd? When is the lunch? Is it going to be that late? Snow? Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay. Well, I think that it's key that I heard. Everyone needs to be part of this. There's a lot going on. It's been a busy winter. It's to the snow, you know, in terms of discussing a lot of issues. So. I will, yes, that sounds good. And then we can move to the next. Take a little break or just move to the next? Move to the next.
I think you have people waiting for it.
A minute saved is a minute earned. I hear you.
Good. So if you could encourage.
Yeah. Are you all setting up for the next meeting? Could you? Yes. Great, appreciate that. It would be June 8th, for the high school, June 8th. Yeah. Great, thank you. Thank you, Ray. I just wanted to, in closing the first item on our agenda, the chair of the school committee has requested to continue the hearing from April 13th tonight until June 8th, 2015, and I'll just note at 7 o'clock the first hearing slot at that hearing. Thank you very much. This is for you, Mary. So what we'd like to do, if we could, I'm waiting for our full board, the next item on our agenda is, we're all setting up now, is the, and I'm going to wait for Judy. Do we need to vote?
Do you want to formally vote on that request?
Do we need to do that? I'd have to wait till Judy comes back.
You may just want to, just for the record.
We could do that if it, sure. I mean, it's... Chair? Sure.
Mr. Chairman, may I request
last session, we heard about half of it in the back row. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Speak up, it was very difficult. Thank you. Was the intelligibility off, or was the sound, the loudness off, or both? No, it just seemed when people talked into the mic, you could hear it clearly. Okay. Sorry to hear that. Okay, we'll definitely be more careful about that in the future.
Okay, we're good.
What?
Okay, can I go? Yes, yeah. What we were thinking, Ray, if we could, if you could just wait a sec, when Judy comes back, we'll just formally vote on the extension. We could, and the motion would be to, at the request of the chair of the school committee, with the endorsement of the school committee here, that a request was made to extend the tonight's hearing to June 8th, have I got it right? At 7 o'clock, first time slot. So, any discussion?
Second.
Motion, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Our next item on the agenda is Notre Dame Training School Incorporated at 1073 Main Street. Site plan review under section II and 3, Roman 3B8 of the zoning bylaw, subject to and with the benefit of the provisions of the Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40A, Section 3. And I'd like to, on the format of this of our second item on the agenda is repeat the same format of our first hearing, which would be for the applicant to present clarification questions by the board, comments by town officials who are here, and then open it up to abutters, neighbors, and interested folks in the audience. So with that, I'd like to welcome the applicant. And Jeff, will you be speaking for the applicant?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Jeff Taccio. I'm here for Notre Dame Training School, otherwise known as Notre Dame Academy, or NDA. What we're doing tonight is your site plan review for you folks, and under 3B8, we've got a special kind of Dover-esque provision where we changed the language to specifically address these Dover Amendment filings that have to do either with educational or religious uses, and it's got some windows under there of as-of-right uses. Here it's a Residence B, but it has to do with the fields, the outdoor fields, which are under 3.2. Additionally, what we're doing is we're proposing a outdoor concession building, which will be accessory to those uses. That's 3.11 under 3A, and that's consistent with basically how we did the high school. Just as an opening, you folks recognize, think that we did, and you discussed it before, but having to do with massing, parking, things of that nature. You'll see from our filing that what we tried to do was we tried to put together a usage chart that was actually based on what was approved for the high school. So when we get to that, we'll be able to discuss it, trying to do it on the same format to make it make it easier for both us and for you. If I can, Brad Caron is here. He's the he's on the board of directors. He's also the chairman of the Capital Committee, and Brad is here. Donna Brickley, who's our athletic director. Also Art Eddy from Birchwood Design. Mark Gabriel from PAR Engineering. And then Amanda Morrissey, attorney from my office as well. Basically, what we're seeking to do is replacement of the natural grass field that's in back of the school to the west of the school with a synthetic turf field. New athletic field lighting, which 80-foot high, 4 poles, and we can give you the details on that. replace an existing scoreboard with a new scoreboard that'll have some speakers in that scoreboard, and we can describe that as well. Additional portable bleacher seating, which will be on poured concrete pads. We can give you some of the numbers as we go into the details. Some on-field storage units that allow for storage of different athletic equipment in these discrete units. Concession restroom building that I talked about earlier, and then refurbishing the existing softball area at the property. The address is 1073 Main Street. You folks, you know it, basically next to and in back of Resurrection Church. It's 69 acres, huge parcel. In the parcel after this field basically goes wooded for a considerable distance down parallel with Gardner Street. So it's a rather impressive parcel, although only portions of it on the east side, closer to Main Street, are currently developed. And as we are now, we've got filings with the Conservation Commission. We have our resource delineation. That was approved, I believe, in January. And we're currently before them now, and Mr. Chessier is doing the review as part of the stormwater review that will actually be folded up into the special permit that you folks will issue on this. We're in the middle of that now. We've got some interesting drainage issues that we're going to meet with him tomorrow. There may be additional delineation requirements, and we're discussing that with Abby and also with Mary as well. Furthermore, we have submitted a traffic memorandum that was prepared by CHA. Jeff Dirk of Van Ass has actually looked at it. He's issued something to you folks. I understand he's not here this evening, so I assume that we're looking to do that perhaps today at the next meeting. So I know that's well underway. And again, what we've done is we've put together a usage plan. And before I ask Art to go through the project, what we've basically done again is to go through and put together a chart that, and I'll hit some of the overall sections. The first having to do with the field lights. What we've done is we've proposed Monday through Friday and then also Saturday until 9 p.m. None proposed on Sunday, and that's basically for all seasons. And then what they propose is amplified sound, but the amplified sound would only be restricted to school events, which would include potential events such as graduation, student council, Office of Institutional Advancement activities, admission events, and then MIAA, MSTCA sanctioned events. And that last one has to do with track. Track is very, very popular at NDA, and they've got a really great team. Not the greatest facilities, but this is a nice opportunity for them to institute some changes. In addition to this multi-purpose field, there are some changes that have to do with sections for the track and field. In the winter season, what they're doing is basically field lights until 5 p.m., no amplified sound. And that's different from the high school. What that is intended to do is to give an option if one of the teams wants to have a practice, because during the winter it'll basically be indoor season, whether it's basketball, etc. What this does is this allows for the opportunity to do that, and again, it's only until 5 p.m. and that's that early sun set to be able to get out there. Will it be used a lot? I don't think so, but they think that's a good idea and a nice option. And then also in the spring season, same as pretty much what was proposed for the fall, until 9 p.m. on the lights, and then the amplified sound will only be proposed to be used for these school events. There is existing field rental now. That's, I think, Saturday mornings to Hingham Youth Soccer, and then in the afternoons until sundown to some select soccer teams. Before we go into the specifics of what the plans entail, from our perspective, this is basically a grass field being ripped up that's in the middle of a track. So I call it a donut project, if you will. And that's going to be replaced with this, the synthetic turf. There's no expansion really beyond where that track is. The track, as part of this, is actually going to be restriped, so they're going to paint the lines, but that track is going to remain. So that pretty much sets kind of an outer boundary on the far side as to where this is going to happen. The number of students at the school is the same. That's not going to change. They've only got so many teams, although they've got about 85% participation in sports by the girls that go to the school, which I think is pretty impressive. Sports are important here. They've got some issues. This backfield, it's a question of whether it's a good thing to be given the chance to play on this field or not. It's muddy. It's got issues, and hopefully this is going to be able to solve it. With that said, I think if I can ask, unless you've got any questions.
Just two quick questions,
Sure.
Jeff. Is the track currently, is that a paved track, a clay track, would not be replaced?
It's got the rubberized surface.
It's synthetic, so rubberized track.
Synthetic, it is painted. From what I understand, it's not undersized, as in legal, illegal, but it's, I believe, the minimum size that a track can be. So it's the bottom level of the size of the track, and that's in place. It's in nice shape. The edges are nice. It's got fencing around on the sides, and that track is going to stay, but for being painted.
So in regards to the actual future of the field itself, it's constrained by the track in terms of a perimeter, so that all of that would then work for will it meet the criteria for the next 20 years or whatever the life cycle is of a field?
Well, what's going to happen is the field will be inside, and that's going to happen. This year, there's going to be something performed which has to do with the discus area, which is to the northeast of the field. So if you look at the field, and I'll ask Art to go through that. So that's going to be an additional piece. As far as the life cycle, I don't think that anything else is proposed to go beyond that area, and I would believe that if the field wears out, all the infrastructure is going to be in place, and I'm fairly confident that this is the place where it's going to be. It just makes the most sense. And when we went out there, what was interesting is the track was rather recent, I believe, but it actually had hard edges. Almost, well, it may have been put in as if there was going to be an artificial field coming along. So unlike the high school that evolved over time and had some interesting grading issues, when you go there, this place has that nice hard box that's in place that I can envision this going down real nicely, fitting really nicely as well. And you had a second question?
Maybe the applicant could address it. It was more the condition of the existing, and you said there were some issues with that. Perhaps the applicant could.
And then the other piece of the equation I should mention is that Mary circulated, I want to say, 8 questions. I'm in the process of going through. I just got in on a flight early this morning, so I started that. And instead of rushing it to get out to you, knowing that we're going to go another evening, we'll definitely follow up on that. And the questions were, well, the ones that I know that I've got on my list, one of the questions was that some of the light spillage was going off to the west into the wetlands. And the question was, can you folks concentrate on shielding that more completely? And the answer is yes. So we're going to take a look back at that. We can touch on some of the photometrics now if we want, or if you'd like to just get general on the light, and then we can come back next time and talk about more focused numbers. But we understand that there's absolutely no reason to project any light to the west. The other provision here that I should mention is that the field is perpendicular to the back of, parallel to the back of the school, so that the lights will basically shine east and west. So neighbors are on the north and south. So we've got the opportunity to direct light not only on the field, but we don't have to be projecting into the directions of the neighborhoods. So that works well. Likewise, we've got a scoreboard with some speakers in it, and that's located to the northwest, and that projects over towards the school. So again, not to the neighbors on the north, not to the neighbors on the south. So I think that's a plus. Currently, there is amplification, and the amplification is via portable speakers, which are rolled out, and then those are used, and then also some bullhorns. So to actually have people with some speakers when, for example, there's a track event. So we can go through a lot of what happens now, and it's basically going to be the same. We've got an increase in some of these portable bleachers, but we anticipate that that's going to be a situation where the folks that don't necessarily have a seat now, because there are 200 bleacher seats currently, those folks are standing around. So we don't anticipate that this is going to spike any of the numbers, but actually give some folks the opportunity to sit down and watch some of the events. And then the other thing that I should mention, and this had to do with the questions, had to do with what the peak capacity was of the fields and the events. There's a track meet in April, and that's their absolute peak event. What happens there is they've got 1,200 athletes who participate, and that goes from about, I think, 7:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon. Our estimation for total gate, if you will, for the entire day is probably somewhere in the range of 1,800 people. But because it's an outdoor event, they don't necessarily have any type of snapshot on the time. There may be events that happen in the morning, parents, athletes come, and then there are completely different events in the afternoon. So that's a fluid number that changes throughout the day. What we can say is that they have implemented agreements with Resurrection Church where they're allowed to park, have people park over there. There are basically, they're kind of symbiotic type relationship between the two. In that instance, on that Saturday event that I'm talking about, I believe the mass starts at 4, so they're cleared out by that time. The other thing is the middle school, they have basically a working agreement with the middle school and also the Hingham Nursery School, where when buses come in to drop the kids off, the buses then turn around and can go and park somewhere until their kids are ready to go back. So they've got this nice operating system that's in place, but as far as I know, there's nothing really ironclad in writing as far as some type of system that goes down. So what I'm putting in there is that we'd like to speak with the police and see if we can come up with something that can be basically approved by you folks, and then have that be the operating document. The other piece of the equation is school dismissal. That's kind of the peak event, and when we hear about the traffic studies probably in a couple of weeks, the prediction is that this won't have any impact on those peak events when the kids are leaving the high school. There's a detail officer who's assigned to the school, and he's really good at directing the merger of the traffic coming out onto Main Street. The traffic reports go through, observations, analysis of that, so that works rather well. Another piece of the equation here is that the girls' lacrosse team currently plays at Ward Street and practices at Ward Street. So what's happening in the springtime is when there's a release, there's also a release of all of the girls who are on that team. So that adds to the outflow of traffic. What will happen as part of this proposal is that the girls lacrosse team is going to be kind of recaptured to the property so that they will be able to practice and also have their games here on the field. So that's going to, anticipated diminution in the outflow for some of that traffic. So that's a plus. Overall, the additional hours, there's still going to be the same number of kids at the school. And there's no proposal to increase numbers of children, et cetera. What this is going to do is this is going to allow these folks to kind of get some breathing room, spread it out a bit, and give the kids the opportunity to, not necessarily have to practice on fields that are wetter or less desirable. It allows the girls to be able to have access to a safe field. It's not going to be lit after school,
Sure.
but depending on when they're scheduled, it just gives them an opportunity to manage their programs on one single field. I don't believe that there's the questions about cheerleading, et cetera, that we had to deal with the high school when we talked about the football, which you folks are now looking at. Being a women's school with basically different religious aspects to what they do. They talk about the national anthem, prayer. They will have like admission events or things of that nature, but events that are tailored towards their religious and academic mission. So it's a little different. The issues are different because we don't have the male, female, and again, the football. That's not something that has to be weighed against anything else. So I think it maybe on our side makes that a little easier, but we'll see as we go forward.
Sure. One of the questions I had looking through the drawing submission is getting an overall plan of since the parking is shared, getting an overall plan of the Resurrection Church property and Notre Dame's, and just in terms of the site plan that affects, not the 67 acres, but the site plan that goes from the Notre Dame to Main Street, which I think would be very helpful in showing the flow along Fleming Drive. And I don't know whether that was renamed. Wasn't it renamed? Well, there's a new street sign there. I don't know if it was, but... Oh, every year. Sorry. Okay, no wonder I can't keep up with it. But that I think would be very helpful. I didn't understand. I also am looking at some of the fields and baseball diamonds, softball diamonds, and the tennis courts. It looks like I was originally of the understanding that the Archdiocese owned the whole parcel, and that both Resurrection and Notre Dame used it as group tenants in entirety. I guess the word is, but I don't know if is that the case, or is it separate parcels, or how does that work?
Excellent question. As part of answering Mary's questions, that pointed out to me that we needed to explain the shared parking better. So when you said, I want to see both properties, we're in the process of doing that and basically counting all of the spaces so that we can attribute them. What we did on the first traffic counts attributed the main number of parking for Notre Dame, and then it didn't go into a whole lot of detail on what was Resurrection, what was swing space. So we're definitely going to do that. And then we pulled the deeds, and I've got to go back through time and find out exactly what's happened as it all goes forward. I know that this parcel has the 69 acres, and I can't tell you what the history of all that was. The school was built around 1965.
Right.
But I will.
The church was built in 57.
57. All right. So I'm going to know. I'm going to know what the answer is to that by next time,
Sure.
and we'll also key it into the parking spaces,
Sure.
because to understand the shared parking agreement, you want to know what
exactly.
what everything is.
And the sight lines and the queuing and all that. Sure. Appreciate
Exactly. And if anyone else has any questions of me, I can turn it over.
I have one question, Jeff.
Sure.
You were telling me that the women's lacrosse team plays at Ward Street or practices there. Is that going to continue on after they do this field?
No, the plan is to be able to recapture them back to this property. I don't know. I'll speak for the folks involved with Ward Street. It was something that we're proud of it. It was something that was nice. It was a really good lacrosse field, grass. Something that was maintained very well, and it was good. It worked out really well. They do get some numbers there. You'll remember some of the no parking signs. What happened sometimes was that it would be an out-of-town opponent, and the parents were new to the field, and we had some folks not really knowing where to park. That's all being controlled. Now Ward Street's really operating well. The place is humming, if you will. And now it looks like they've got the opportunity to bring everything back to the school. That helps them from a programming perspective, because they don't have to have the kids jumping into their own cars and going to different places. So the more that they can minimize those trips, it's better from a traffic standpoint, safety standpoint, control standpoint. So that'll actually be a big plus for their programming, and from the traffic numbers, it's going to keep that number of girls from jumping in their cars and then leaving, as part of that dismissal traffic. So we see that as a plus as well.
So just a quick question on that. The girls drove, there was no bus?
I believe no toward.
As needed.
Okay, just in terms of traffic.
Judy, do you have any questions of me?
No, I was going to wait till we
Okay.
heard about the project.
All right, so with that, Art Eddy from Birchwood Design.
Wonderful. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. What I'm going to do is walk you quickly through the existing conditions of the field and what's there today, and what the field will look like potentially in the future. Obviously, the plan runs up to down, is north is the top, south is the bottom, east to the right, and west. Main Street is to the east, Pine to the south. As you come into the site, obviously, Resurrection Church parking to the right. You come up to the main drive. On the right, you can see the softball field. So there's two fields there. One is a JV softball field, one is a varsity softball field. The JV softball field is kind of a makeshift field, kind of a temporary condition, as well as a multi-use field that's used for multi-use sports throughout the year. On the left is kind of the larger parking lot of the Notre Dame Academy, and then you come up into the main drive to the building, which is on the 2/3 on the site. That field, again, to the north is dropped down, so that's actually set about 10 feet below the main drive, so you've kind of got a lower condition.
The softball field.
The softball field. As you come around the back, currently on the south side of the building is a small kind of utility shed that's there today. That's kind of what has been the back of house. Your kind of main utility core for the building is in that corner. Dumpsters, things like that. We're going to look at addressing that through this process and cleaning that area up a little bit. And then when you come around the back of the building, you have kind of the main field. To the south of the track is long jump and triple jump, so you have a running path there with pits on opposite ends. The main field, which exists inside the field currently, is pole vault and high jump within those areas, and then obviously the field within itself. That field drops down about 18 inches, and that's what Jeff was kind of mentioning, is that it looks like at some point it might have been built to be a synthetic turf field, where it was kind of clean it out, clean it up, and then put it back. To the north, kind of on the right side of the field right now, it currently is the shot put area outside the field. So let me just show you.
So the area in the red rectangle on the existing conditions plan on the northwest side, is that a building? Is that?
On the, you're talking about this base?
That rectangle piece?
That's a high jump area.
Oh, that's the high jump area.
That's a high jump area. So that's basically track surfacing, and they put the mat, you can see the mat location. It's kind of, they put the mat there.
Okay, I got it.
Can you show them the shot put, people who turn around?
Sure. And then the shot put area, the existing shot put area is here.
I see.
Currently. All right. So once the field goes in, what will happen is, as you know, synthetic turf, you can't throw your throwing events on synthetic turf. So we need to move those kind of out of what was in the center of the field. They used to throw javelin and discus there. So we need to move those locations out. We're going to move what was triple jump and long jump inside into what's called the D areas, which are those areas on the south and the north. And then we'll move pole vault and high jump up to the north. So we keep those with inside the field. The track stays. Basically what we'll do is cut the track and then heel it right in so that we'll come up right to surface with it. And then the north D and the south D areas will fill in. We'll move javelin to the south where the long jump and triple jump exists today. To do that, we need to push in that slope. It's already a disturbed area. It's basically a lawn slope, but we need to pull it back just to flatten it out. So we're going to have a 2-foot wall along that edge, and then a little bit of track surfacing just for the run-up area and then the throwing area. That throwing area will have a portable net system that's 30 feet tall, because we're obviously throwing javelin. We want to protect spectators. That'll be around. That can come up and down. As you move around the track, as you can see in the center of the field, there's currently kind of a gray rectangle. That is the 200 existing bleacher seats that exist today. That's going to remain. And then to the north and south of that, what we're going to put in is a 75-foot portable bleacher on a concrete pad. So the new portable bleachers also have companion seating and ADA accessibility. It'll help bring the site up into ADA compliance within that. We're going to add paths to make sure that there's ADA compliance to all those spaces. Also with that is with the discus throwing area kind of up to the northeast. So we went from a shot put area up into a discus area. That discus area, we've had some conversations with the neighbors. We're going to be looking at trying to kind of pull that back as much as possible and look in that area. We do have a wall in that area. On the far left corner, it's about 5.5 feet, just under about 5.5 feet, and then it dips down to like 2 or 3 feet around the edge. Again, that'll be an enclosed area as well. Obviously, we want to protect the cars and protect the track. It allows discus to occur at the same time.
So the northwest, which is the upper left
Yeah.
on that plan, that would be leveled or excavated into the upper grade.
That's correct.
Whereas the bottom
same thing.
portion, it's in a bowl, but you're extending the floor of the bowl.
That's correct. That's correct. That whole area dips down and flattens out. We're just kind of trying to flatten out those areas.
Will the grade of the field be raised up a certain point?
Over existing, it'll be existing what the track is today.
Okay.
Because right now, like I said, that field dips down, and one of the things that we talked about with their athletic program is the field is really hard to fit soccer within, because you have this kind of 18-inch drop within the field, and then you have drainage with inside that. You're really condensing the field. By making that whole field a full field, we can now have a full-size soccer within the side of it.
What are the dark lines? Are those setbacks from
Those are the
wetlands?
setbacks from the wetland setbacks, so that's the 50 and the 100 within the wetland setbacks. The green lines area represents the edge of the wetland.
So the 50-foot, there's no work allowed within the 50-foot.
That's correct.
But there is selective work allowed within the 100.
That's correct. And currently, with the way the lights are set up, you can see that little jog, and then to the north, that's where the lights are falling within, so we're trying to keep them within that undisturbed area. The existing scoreboard is to the west. There's a little bit of cleared area there. There's an existing scoreboard. As Jeff had mentioned, we're going to replace that scoreboard. That scoreboard has an amplified sound built within it, so it's a complete unit.
On the upper left of the plan, is that house on Gardner Street?
Yes.
So there's a number of houses as Gardner Street curves, there's a number of houses within a certain distance of the field. How far from the field are the closest houses?
I don't know exact numbers, but if we took the half of the field, that half of field's almost 50 yards. So you're almost looking at 150 to 200 feet from the upper edge of the track.
Upper edge of the track to the property lines of the houses
right.
on Gardner.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then keep in mind that also bowls up pretty extensively. So there's like 7 or 8 feet that bowls up from where that track is. As I mentioned, around kind of the south is where the new concession building will be. We're going to be tearing down what is the existing storage shed and replacing the concession building with that'll have restrooms in it with that as well.
Can you point where that is? I can't
Sure.
quite figure that.
Sure. This is the existing storage, and then this will be the new concession building.
Okay.
Right in this area. So we're basically taking this and replacing it kind of here. Along with that, as I mentioned, from concession is there's storage in the concession building, so there's built-in storage for that to replace some of the storage we're losing. But we're also replacing storage, the kind of yellow dots at the end of the track, and then the two there. That allows us to kind of move athletic equipment out of the storage unit and then displace it closer to the track and closer to where it's needed, which helps obviously with managing events, things like that.
Is the trapezoidal dotted line in the southern part, is that the leaching or the septic area, or is that a detention?
This?
Yeah, what are those, that?
This is also an isolated wetland there.
Oh, it is, I see.
And along with that, I mean, as I mentioned, the back of house, we're just trying to reorganize that area. We're going to be putting the dumpsters in enclosures. Right now, they're on the grass, kind of on the side, kind of reorganizing parking back there. It's not clearly defined, so we're going to reorganize that area as well, around right around the concession stand, and try and make that a controlled entrance. It's gated today. We're talking about ornamental gate there and a control point so that, you know, things like ticketing, things like that can happen within the athletic events. When we get to the softball field, really what we're doing at the softball field is replacing the infield mix, is taking out the old, putting the old new infield mix back, replacing the backstop, upgrading the kind of dugout areas that exist there today. There's a shed. We're going to be removing that shed and putting in kind of an overhead kind of scorekeepers area around the field.
It'll be a natural turf and clay in the infield, a natural ball field, basically.
Yeah, natural ball field. We're not really going to do much to the grass itself, but other than once we kind of hit that line where we clean up the infield, we'll clean up that edge and heal that back into the natural grass. We may do some overseeding, things like that.
Is there any lighting or sound on the softball field?
No, there's no lighting and sound. There's an existing scoreboard that we're going to replace with just a new scoreboard, but there's no amplified sound or anything with it. It'll just be a replacement of what's existing.
How far from the ball field, the softball field, is the back of the rectory or the back of the church? Is it at long distance?
Yeah, it's pretty long.
Long distance?
Yeah. And again, that also, it goes up again, so you're kind of in a bowl again. Yeah. So you're down on the field and then up, and then it kind of rises up by the tennis courts. The tennis courts are actually up, if I recall, a little bit.
Okay.
Sure, the storage units. So the storage units are here. There's two kind of along this edge, and then three here. They're 12 by 15 storage units. They're, you know, they look kind of, they're like a roll-up door, kind of a metal unit. We get them in colors that match school colors, things like that. They're kind of, we like them because they help organize storage around the site as opposed to Connex boxes later or things like that. Helps keeps the site looking pretty clean. Details on the 26 by 26 building? Yeah, so in the building, basically it'll be a roll-up window concession area. There's not going to be a full kitchen or anything like that. It's plug-in, mostly bring in, you know, hot pots, things like that from booster clubs. They're not going to do a full kitchen. Keep it pretty simple. There may be a refrigerator there just for, you know, cold sodas, things like that. And then a storage unit, so there's really a 10 by 10 storage unit and then two restrooms within the back of the building there. And again, that's just kind of an improvement over what they have consistently. And then there's outside, there's a small paving area with two tables, outdoor seating area for that. There is a little bit room if the school wanted to bring in a grill for the day or a booster club wanted to bring in a grill, they could put it there, but it's not a fixed cooking surface or anything like that. And then it just kind of cleans that area up and again kind of makes a gateway for the entrance into the athletic facility.
Sure.
You have any questions?
One of the questions that I have, and it has to do with the circulation and the times of entrance, and, you know, because there are 5 institutions in that area of South Hingham that are very close, and maybe this would be a good segue for, perhaps we could talk with the police department about how is that traffic managed, and is there an overall traffic plan that deals with individual events and or overlapping events between the different institutions? Perhaps Chief Prano, you could inform us on that.
It was noted earlier that during the weekdays we have a school resource officer that is assigned to Notre Dame Academy, and so he handles all the traffic at the end of the school day. So and as you said, between middle school, Notre Dame, and South School, we have a lot of activity. It's historically, you don't want to go through that area between 2:05 and about 3 o'clock, because it's, no matter what, it's going to be backed up. And each school has, middle school has a crossing guard as a South School, and of course Notre Dame now has a resource officer directing the traffic. Over the history, Notre Dame, again, has worked with us and with getting details as necessary. Their graduation was always a big event where we have detail officers, and with this track meet you were talking about. So we've, kept in touch, and, when events come up, they let us know, and we work it out.
What I find very helpful in that area of the world, because I live near there, is the supervised traffic. The lady who runs the traffic at the middle school is one of the best I've ever seen. Rosie. She makes
She's a veteran.
a stress out, a manageable traffic situation, because no one really knows what the right-of-way is. And I'm wondering on events, and that's typically the morning is the worst. However, the events where middle school and Notre Dame would overlap are really the afternoon events. And are there two? Is there one for Notre Dame, for example, and the middle school, or is it typically the middle school where it's filtered? Where the traffic control happens?
Well, when the school gets out, Rosie's there at 2:05 when the middle school exits, and then at 2:35 Notre Dame exits. So there is a little time period there, and then I believe about 2:30, 2:45 is when South School they get out. So it's been like that for years.
Are there any events that would be planned on this athletic program that would add significant traffic within that time frame that wouldn't be anticipated now or as part of the current usage kind of pattern?
I don't believe so.
Yeah. No, there's not.
No.
Okay.
No.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. I think I'd like to ask.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
Just back to the site plan, I had just two questions. Could you just describe kind of the pedestrian flow on the site, like where people park, how they get into the complex? That was one question, and sort of along the same lines of the site flow is how will the experience of this field change for the people who are visible abutters? We see a light plan that you said that was going to change, but we don't see a sound study, an equivalent sound study. So, so what's the flow for people attending and for people abutting?
Sure. Right now, currently, as it exists today, there is, as you can see to the north, there's parking. There is access to the field there currently. There is kind of a sidewalk that loops around the building from a pedestrian standpoint. So those parking spaces pick up and kind of drop into the kind of middle of the field or kind of that upper section. There was a concern, obviously, for the school as people are parking there, they can park and sit and watch as opposed to kind of have control over those sites. But that access comes in. From the other lot, kind of to the east, there is an access there currently. There is actually a gated control there, so it's a chain link fence with a path that goes to the field. So there is some access that acts on both sides of the field. In the future, that's going to kind of remain, but what we're trying to do is drive people to that kind of lower entrance from the public side. Yeah.
One question.
Sure.
You can stand up. Would there be, like at the high school field, we have access to the ambulance can drive right on the field?
Yeah. Again, that access drive, currently you can drive right onto the field. There's a set of double gates right at that access. That's going to remain. So that access to the track, there'll also be a set of double gates. We're kind of widening the path a little at the other set of double gates, so you can also access the end. And then at that end, there'll be a set of slide gates, so you can get in there as well. So you kind of have access to both sides of the field from an emergency standpoint.
I'll add a little on the the back of house that he was talking, the back of house that he was talking about, where that storage shed is now. I don't know exactly what year it was put in, but there's an isolated wetland over there, and it's not the most attractive garage, and over time, it's been a place where you can put things. It's like in back of everyone's shed. Maybe there's an old lawnmower there or whatnot. There are some cedars that are there just inappropriately planted, and the place, it's a bit of a mess. That's where the dumpster is, not enclosed. This gives us the opportunity to use this side of the school that's currently ignored and make it, try to make that more of a focal with the concession over there. So everything that we're looking at there, we're before the Concom currently, because that's within the proximity to that isolated wetland. So I think we're pretty confident that everything that we're showing is just so much better with wetland seed mix. We're pulling out all the inappropriate things, so it just gives a nice opportunity to dress that side up. Also, with respect to we could put a walkway in, the fundraising bricks, etc. So it turns an area which is kind of ignored into into useful space here. With respect to the sound, we did put in that we'll put a governor on here, and we looked at that, and I compared it to what we did with the high school, and tried to say, all right, well, do we have a situation where we need to pull out all the portable speakers and have a sound meter, et cetera? I think the history here is that there aren't, we don't have the history that we had at the high school, where, for example, the bleachers were there pursuant to a variance, they were right on the property line. There was just so much history with the high school that we all had to work through with the neighbors. Like you said, everyone was on the same team, and we worked that through. In this instance, just in talking to people, they, generally we hear it's there, we know when it's there, and they're not the same level of comments, if you will. In this instance, where they're getting rid of the portable speakers, they're aiming it back towards this area. I think it's generally going to be a positive. If there are, for example, some type of criteria for once it's set up to determine where that governor level is, I think that's appropriate. I just can't say right now at the beginning what that number is, but where it's, again, not directed towards any of the neighborhoods, directed right at the field, I think that's something that we could probably get out there and figure out at some time. So we left that a little ambiguous. I didn't want to choose a number. I didn't want to presume anything. So,
but when you, but again, back to the question of how are things going to change here for the neighbors, by putting on lights, you're changing dramatically their experience with sound. So what was once kind of after-school games with sound is now nighttime games with sound. So wouldn't they want to know kind of, is it louder than what we're hearing now? Is it, sort of, I don't know, some quantity?
Yeah, I mean, as of, yes, understood.
Like at the high school, we did a whole, like the photometric, the word is escaping me, but the sound plan,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, Kavanaugh Tachi did the plan before and after. Yeah, I think that was appropriate for the high school for a host of reasons. Particularly, we're moving it further away. We have the different types of speaker technology that all of that could be tracked. In this instance, I don't think, for example, you're going to have the football play-by-play. It's really going to be different in the way that it comes out. We're not going to have that more intensive play-by-play usage. We'll talk about if there's a goal, et cetera, but that itself is somewhat minimized. I think what I'd suggest, and I totally understand, my way gets there the same, but without having a sound engineer go out there now. We run through everything, and then we do it later. I think the way to respectfully to suggest that we propose this and then start to get an idea as to what appropriate numbers are at that time. So whether we bring a speaker out to that area, aim it in the correct, direction and take some readings now, use that as, for example, a baseline, or make sure that we correlate. All of that makes total sense. We'll have to work together to get an idea as to how to articulate that. I don't think, and I didn't when we were looking at getting, for example, the traffic study, the other studies, it didn't, to me, rise to the level where I thought that it was really equated with the high school. The high school was very particular, and there were particular issues, complaints, sins of the past that we heard anecdotally. I think in this instance that the usage is, it's been tightly controlled.
Jeff, it's good noise? I mean, I don't...
No, it's not. It's not good noise. It's good noise. There's starter guns when the track goes. I didn't realize that.
Scare the pants off you.
Right, but it's been going on since 1965.
Right, but not at night. But so there's a change. So I'm just saying, is how do we know? How do we quantify this change if we don't have a baseline and we don't have?
Yeah,
I think Judy's got a great point. I think it's the ambient levels right now and the ambient levels at the property lines. The other thing I might suggest also with the sound is that the school building itself, because it's radiused, is a sounding board.
Correct.
And I think depending upon where these speakers are located, you could get a little bit of an echo, and it could, I'm thinking more towards the houses on Pine Tree Grove or Pine Tree, where they're going to see the sound bounced. I think it would be really good to get a baseline, because it's going to be a change.
We thought about that as well. The other thing is, it's not going to have to be so loud, because the sound is going out and it hits, and what happens is the back of the school faces west. So what we're seeing is it goes from west to east, then east to west. The neighbors are over on the side. So we're taking that into account when we're looking at this. We'll definitely, I understand where you're coming from. Perhaps when we ask for abutter comments, because I'm not aware that it's at a level where it's a problem, but we're ears are open. So if there's something like that, we'll definitely come up with a way to articulate something. But I think if it's possible, what I'd like to do is to be able to fix it in the field, if you will, and that has to do just with consideration of resources and dollars. All of the dollars that are raised here are, being raised to go into the actual construction. Unlike other entities, it's, that's where the money has to come from. So we're trying to, we're trying to be judicious.
Is there any plan to lease the fields, rent
Yes.
them?
Leasing of the fields, currently it's Saturday mornings to Hingham Youth Soccer, and then there's like a select soccer team that goes out there weekdays until now I think it's 5:30 sunset, somewhere around there. There will be a plan to be able to expand some of those uses. No amplification whatsoever for anything that isn't school related, but they would like to have the opportunity to recoup, some through the programming. What they do now is they get applications for people who want to use, whether it's auditorium, fields, et cetera, and that's something that they go through as those applications come in, but no sound for them. And what we did was we went through, and this is probably a little something of what you talked to the high school about, is that we put together some blocks of time that something could happen within. But as far as the predictability right now, we don't exactly know what would fill into those areas. But what we intended to do is to be able to fix some times and have a situation where that gives them some flexibility for the use, again, not the amplified.
So in other words, not have the schedule you have now, which is 6 nights a week until 9 o'clock, but you'll restrict that to some degree.
Well, what'll happen is that won't be used all through what those times were. We figured that the 9 was on a night, for example, where it is going to be rented. We thought that would be an appropriate time. We didn't. It's funny. We looked at the high school at 8:30, And we said, no, we think that's a little restrictive. We think that we can operate this till 9. Well, we were, lo and behold, the high school's asking for the trendsetters. We didn't know what they were doing, but that kind of made some sense to us. What we did was we also had a 15-minute after-event clear-out time, and that just had to do with our initial thinking was that if we were asking for 9 o'clock, that we didn't want to have the half-hour clear-out time, because we're not going to have the amount of people that they would have at the high school. Just given the small amounts, we think that we can get a quick cleanup, exit of the field within that 15-minute window.
Will your traffic study have those attendance numbers?
It's got, the traffic study has what the experience is now for the numbers. What the traffic study does is it looks at the peak times. So what we're talking about now is way off, that's all off peak time. So if there's a rental, for example, at 7 o'clock till 8 o'clock at night, for example, that won't do it. That'll just happen. That won't do anything to add to that. What the chiefs say, like the 2:05 to 2:30 period. So the findings are that other than those peak times, that if there's a practice or whatnot, when those let out. So, for example, if there's something that happens now, not a lit event, but let's say there's a girls' game or a girls' practice or one of these rentals to this select team, when those let out, there's it's basically just absorbed into Main Street, just into the stream of traffic.
I agree with you that this is a different site than the high school, but I do think that's quite a significant change for the neighborhood, 9 o'clock, 6 nights a week. I think it's something you want to look at going incrementally, looking at it and then having a look back, 3 nights a week until 9, because that's pretty, we just discussed it. It's a lot for the people living nearby. And you're increasing the sound, you're increasing their light, and you are increasing the use of the field for 3 hours past what they're used to right now. To make that 6 nights a week and you're also using it on in the winter. So I think I think you ought to consider scaling the 6 nights a week back.
We took notes during the prior, and I think what I heard is that you folks wanted them to give a little more specificity on games, et cetera. So I think what we'll do is, before we come back, we'll do a little bit of a test on what those numbers really mean to us. Our thinking was approve it till 9, and then we've got a window within which to work. And I think that some of the assumptions are that, well, if we just give them that much time, they're just going to fill it up, which I'm hearing the school committee saying no. We're saying no, but I think it's incumbent on us to show you what we mean.
Well, you're saying you're doing rentals. The school committee doesn't do any rentals with sound or lights. So I think we have to really get a handle on kind of what that involves.
We don't do any rentals with sound. It would just be light.
With light, yeah. So that's a little different also. And are rentals covered under Dover?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah?
They get to choose who comes in, and if it's educational in nature. We went through a lot of this with the high school, but yes.
One of the things that I was really struck by in our last hearing was the desire of the neighbors to have a really close kind of a committee hands-on review. It's really managing expectations and also having their needs and wants heard, but also having the time to understand it. And I'm wondering, have you done any kind of an outreach with the folks on Gardner Street and the folks on Pine Grove, just so that, and even include some of the folks on Main Street, because in the, that 4-block radius, whatever, just so people can have an understanding of the expectations. I know people were noticed on the hearing, but it's hard for people to get out to a lot of these, and so I'm just thinking for the neighbors and the abutters, it would be very helpful.
They did.
They did. Okay.
They did. Yep, they already did. Back when we were filing with the Conservation Commission, so I think it would have been around January. They invited folks to come in. I think it may have been a Saturday morning. It was a morning, and they had the plans. So they elicited a lot of comments, and I think from the folks that I talked to, and you're close. All right, so it's my client, so take it for what it's worth. But the general comments that I get is that they've been a really good neighbor, and there's a lot of good positive things. That's what I've heard. So as we go forward, we'll continue that.
Could you provide the board with some of the questions and the discussion and some of the decisions that were made, or at least shared understandings from that outreach at those outreach meetings?
I wasn't there.
I stepped in just for a minute just to speak with one of the folks that were there, and it was very positive, but I was just in and out. It was in the president's side of the building. It was a reception, a tea that was offered to the neighbors, and quite well attended at the time. But the atmosphere seemed fine, but I can't comment too much more on that.
And then another issue, and I don't want to steal if Dr. Schreier's in back of me. He had some excellent comments that had to do with that area where the discus on the northeast side. He had talked about there's a berm there. And what he had explained to me was that when they converted the convent portion here to, I think it was a science wing, that was all something that was worked out as a condition, and he actually worked on behalf of the neighbors in making sure that the screening and everything was all enhanced. What will happen is there's an arc of parking there, so as people pull in park, there'll be lights that will potentially sweep the back of the buildings. He did a lot of measurements. In the interim, we've been talking amongst ourselves, so we're already talking about shortening that up to kind of the minimum usable distance. Also, we'll be working on enhancing the plantings and all that more. What's happened is we didn't know any of that, so now we do. So instead of just putting down X number of trees, now we'll actually go out there with purpose and kind of figure out where the sweep of the lights will be. So that's an example of, how I think we're responding to specific comments.
Great. I'd like to,
Sarah?
more questions or comments from the board?
Jeff, I know you're going to be looking into the origin of the title with Resurrection, and do you know whether Resurrection has an intention to build a new parish hall? I'm just wondering if that's going to impact parking.
Parish hall? Yep, there's no intention.
And there was a shared parking arrangement now with Resurrection?
There is. And that was, I think it was around 1997. There are some writings that I've been able to find that says, one group can use the tennis courts. I think some of the language was that NDA gets to use it for school parking and for event activities. And that happens now, happens actually really well. They coordinate with Resurrection. They know what the schedule it is. So between having, for example, there are no events which are proposed for Sunday for NDA. So we avoid that entire Sunday cycle. And then, for example, on that large event, they know that that event's done by 2:30 and everyone's gone before that Saturday evening mass. And we'll know more. I want to know more about it myself, just because.
It'd be good to know.
Yeah, just the history. It is good to know.
Questions?
Sarah.
Judy? Sarah? No? I think I'd like to open it for John Chesia, our engineering consultant, to share his review of the plans and state of play.
And I did review this for the Conservation Commission, so I basically amended that portion into this letter. So there's a few things I think that the board may want. Usually, one of the things we get is sort of a zoning table. I mean, they're not changing the building, and they do show setbacks, but usually you get a table of parking and uses and all that type of thing, which we didn't get in this case. There's a very small change to the parking by the concession stand. I think a couple spaces are eliminated. Most of my comments actually revolve around the drainage, and I'll just give you a little brief. If I can go to I'll go to this because it's easy.
Sure.
It's an interesting thing. I don't think it's quite as complicated as the high school was.
You might have to bring the mic over, John. Sorry.
Bring the mic. Thank you. Is this like a... Yeah, this is a scary thing for me to be doing. Okay.
John, then stand on the other side. Thank you.
Smile. I'm glad I got a clean suit on today. So the way it works, there's two head walls. One's here and one's over here. There's wetlands in here. Pipes go underneath, come down through this way, and then through here into Pine Grove Road and down Main Street.
Wow.
So, and actually Roger Fernandez was at the Concom hearing, and for another reason. So this, and there was an easement granted. We've got information on that. When Pine Grove Road was developed, an easement was granted to them to tie into this drainage, which then, so it does go into the town system. So, anyway, this one is actually like a spring. The wetlands, which are fairly extensive, drain in intermittent streams down around this way, but this piece gets intercepted and comes in that way. And I think most of the drainage for the school ties into that system, but we don't have a full plan of the whole school. Anyway, so understanding that network, they're not proposing to, the way they've designed, they're not proposing to add any flow to that system because they're going to infiltrate underneath the field. But you know, then they did test pits sort of like running along the edges, sort of boxing it like this. Looks like this area up in this part might have been a filled wetland. There's a lot of fill up here, maybe 4 or 5 feet in different soils. So as with the high school field, you got to dig to the proper level of soil. What are you going to build up? You're going to replace with permeable material so that it drains back down. So there's details along those lines. So so what we're looking for is a little more information on the pipe and how this whole place works as together. There is a Zone A, which is a Zone A, in this particular case, is Zone A tributary to a surface water supply. So these intermittent streams flow to Accord Brook, which is a surface water supply. So there's a 200-foot setback for pretty much any type of new stormwater BMP, one of the key things is where's that zone? And the intermittent streams on MassGIS are out here somewhere, and they're going to have to sort of locate where that is to know where the zone is, show the zone on the plan.
Has to be how far away?
200 feet. Now, the track's already here. So the track, if there's something with the track that that might be okay, but it depends on where that line comes into this. It can affect how they design the system.
So, John, this site is within the Accord Pond Protection District?
There's the Zone A for surface water supply, plus it's in the Zone 2 for the wells.
For the wells,
So it's a different type of zone. So the Zone 2 for the wells, that makes it somewhat of a more critical area in terms of treatment and that type of thing.
So in terms of, it's a porous system permeable system which will allow recharge down into the water table. It's not paved. But on the other side of the coin, it's the issue of the fines, and I'm thinking in terms of a synthetic turf field with the little rubber fines. How does one keep that kind of a thing away from this aquifer area, or is it filtered within?
Yeah, the way the field would work, provided it's properly constructed and that the soils are proper underneath it, is pretty much water falls in it and drains right down. Right through. In the way they're put together, I don't believe that the little rubber pieces could ever get down through. They're more likely to get scattered. You go next to one of these and they might get tracked around a little bit. So whatever catches them in the edges needs to trap them out, so they don't just go down the pipe and then go out into Accord Brook that way. So there needs to be sort of a pre-treatment step to keep those particles out of the system. They're not going to make it through into the ground. layers of materials and everything, so that shouldn't happen. I don't even know if they can get through the
So, for
grass
example,
part.
on a winter season like this, would they brush or plow that field? And would then
I
the
don't
fines
think so.
go into the perimeter, or would it all be natural?
I don't know what I don't think you plow them. I don't think you want to
How
put
do you
anything
clean
on
them? How do you clean them in the winter, or do they just?
There's two things you can do that we recommend. You can plow it down to like an inch so that there's an inch of snow and then let it melt from there. This is normally what the condition is if you wanted to plow it and remove it. But we don't recommend plowing it because obviously a plow crossing is going to catch it, rip it, and damage it. But yeah.
And Gary,
They're not planning to use it?
Yeah, with the microphone. Right. We just put down the winter on a limited time, just if it is available, if it is clear, they can use it, so they're not in violation of the permit. But the intent isn't to plow it, to make it available for, any winter cycle of sports. It's just, here it is, it's not spring yet, it's one of those beautiful 62-degree days, and the kids want to have a captain's practice or something. It'll be something along those lines.
Okay.
I think that we have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow with the conservation agent to go over some of these things in terms of the drainage. And some of the other items in my letter I know have already been discussed tonight. You've already asked the questions that I had in my letter, so I don't know that I need to take up any more time going through those.
Didn't mean to steal your thunder on that.
No, that's fine, I think unless you have questions for me, I'm pretty much set.
You talked about the scale of the drawings. Do you think that's an issue we need to worry about, that the vicinity map is not to scale, something else?
Well, there's one thing. So
in general, the plans are not to scale.
A lot of the plans are these aerial photographs, which they have a scale on them, but it's not like a survey plan. It's a photograph. The area that was surveyed or for plan development was the track area, the concession stand area, not the softball field. There are bleachers proposed for the softball field too. I don't know whether they move them from one to the other or if that's the same because they look the same size. I'm not sure what the.
I definitely need a little more understanding of the bleachers, so that's something that I'd appreciate in the next meeting. I just can't see where I see where the existing bleachers are. I don't understand these movable, I think you call them bleachers. So that would be good.
Yeah.
So do you think it's necessary to have scaled plans for the vicinity of the softball field?
I think that's up for you guys to decide if there's enough information or not. The other thing is the property line. Typically you get a meets and bounds. I think it's required under the regs here, but for the most part, it does not make sense necessarily to have a whole 60 acres of whatever. That's a lot of cost. But where work is very close to the property line, maybe what you would want to do is condition it that be surveyed so that they're within their property limits. Most of the place on the project, they're not that close to the property line,
Right, but
except
on that
for that
southern
one.
side, I can't really tell where the houses are in relation to the. Yeah.
The rest of it, the isolated wetland, is actually on the Notre Dame property.
That green one.
The green one, on the
oval.
Yeah, so they have to sort of stay away from that a bit anyway.
John, when I look at the locust plan that was submitted in the CHA documents, it seems like if one were to do the upper half of that plan, not include the middle school, but if one were to do the plan that goes from Pine Grove, includes the NDA, and goes up to the Gardner Street, would that be possible to get as a plan? In terms of...
I think it's probably a cost item for the survey. I think what they did, and you'd have to ask them, but I think they probably did a limited existing condition survey in the locus of where the work was proposed, and then compiled the remainder using the aerials, which they, it is a GIS thing, so they probably got them at a scale, but it isn't really a survey. And they're going to need to actually in order to do the stormwater, they're going to need to locate all the other stormwater components, because you have to do an O&M plan for that. So you need to know it. But Pine Grove Road's public, so they don't, I think they've got plans from the town and they can tell me that, and I may see them tomorrow, that shows that system.
Right.
It may have to do some survey to put them on the same elevation base. I'm not sure if they're on the same base.
So this is a storm system that ties into Main Street from Pine Grove, and so is the sanitary system for the school, is it a treatment facility or is it a septic?
It's an on-site treatment system, and I believe that the components of the treatment system, I believe it was replaced because the plans show an abandoned septic tank, and the leaching field itself appears to be up. I don't know whether it's under the parking lot or up in that. It looked like it got pumped in that direction based on what was shown on the plan for utilities. Again, like most of the utilities probably come down the road and come into the site, but they're only doing a few things in the back, so you don't have all of those details. You may not need them for some things. That's something that, it's up to you guys to, what do you need, what don't you need? You might want some more on the softball field. And,
I'm thinking, and also anything that's shared relative to, facilities, it would go on your recommendation, because I think you're hearing what the board's understanding and what we don't understand, so you would know better on the plans that would be needed for that.
Well, I think they probably can take the parking lot and, without necessarily doing a full survey,
Sure.
You could figure out, somebody could count the spaces, they could say, here's what these guys have, here's what these guys have, and you could just go out and do it, which you probably couldn't do up until maybe this week, because there was still snow piles all around the edge, even when I went out, a week ago. So, but that, there may be something you can do without a full survey of the whole thing, but certain parts of it, they're going to have to do something to bring it up a little bit. That would be my recommendation.
Sure. That sounds appropriate.
I'm just looking at your comments, John, and it sounds like Aquarian, Board of Health, and Hingham Light all need to be involved in some capacity in looking at this.
Well, I think, the Board of Health, they're going to have, there's a concession stand getting tied into the septic system, so that they're going to have to get involved with that. Aquarian, I'm not sure whether the current
irrigation wells.
Yeah, is there? I don't know whether there's how it's irrigated now, because it shows that this on the plan. It shows that this irrigation heads.
Mm-hmm.
How it's irrigated, I don't know. Is it Aquarian? Is there a well on site? Any of those types of issues, I think a narrative, excuse me, a narrative could probably describe that, but it's just not clear, because that's one of the things that the regulations require. What are the impact to services? So presumably there would be less demand for water with a synthetic field, so that would be a bonus, I would think. Septic-wise, they're tying in a concession stand. It's new bathrooms. Did they go into the school beforehand? Is it any more use? That's something the Board of Health really would decide, but you might want to hear from them relative to that.
Is the field drainage system tying into this public storm drain in Pine Grove? So there's no on-site, structures for any of that?
There appears to be an on-site system underneath the discus area. It's not real clear exactly, but this shows some sort of subsurface structure of some sort of infiltration system. Again, some of the details on that. So where does everything go is kind of important for the whole thing. Because you do, part of the thing with the drainage is you do need an O&M for the site, not just for the field.
That's right.
For the whole site. Once you're in, that's one of the things you have to do. Bring it up to speed a little bit.
And then it does seem like you wrote the 10 standards required for the management of erosion and sediment, so that is something you should deal with and answer, I think.
Yeah, usually what happens with those, the erosion control thing, this is big enough that it would require a stormwater pollution prevention plan and an NPDES, EPA filing. Frequently what happens is that they like to get at least close enough through the boards to know where they're going to end up before they do that. In this case, where it is kind of shaped like a bowl, as long as the stuff stays inside the bowl, they're all right, because all the water's going to just pretty much stay there. There is an issue with that isolated wetland. There's erosion in the corner of the parking by the shed there, and I think that we'll probably be talking about that tomorrow a little bit too, because that's something that's going to need to be addressed.
One of the other questions on the overall parking area is the street lighting for the Resurrection parking lot is horizontal lighting, these large, they look like sodium vapor fixtures projecting from the telephone poles going down the access way. But the lighting in Notre Dame is more of a downlight, you know, on a more traditional pole. Is the lighting going to be changed in the parking areas? The lighting spill in the current parking lots, at least the Resurrection one, is very strong because it's horizontal lighting. I didn't know if there would be any possibility in the shared parking to deal with that.
Yeah, there was.
Nothing's proposed there.
No change.
No change.
I wasn't sure. Is there any walkway lighting proposed as well?
No. We'll get some we'll look at that with some details.
Sure.
It's actually close to the building, so whether it's light packs, et cetera, but that'll be something that we'll look at. That brings up a question for me: do we have any light packs on the concession building, et cetera? And I can't answer that as I stand here now, so we'll definitely look at that as well.
Great. Any more questions from the board?
Not for the moment.
I think I'd like to, if we could, open it up to questions and comments from the abutters and neighbors.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. Would anybody from the neighbors, the abutters, like to speak? Sure, welcome. Come on up.
My name is Laura Sorgi. I'm an abutter at 6 Winsong Way, and I have many concerns with this project, and my biggest concern would be the lighting till 9 o'clock at night, and I know you talked about being an all-girls school, not having the football. My concern would be the revenue opportunities, and I teach CCD at the school, so I see the South Shore Selects and the volume of traffic that comes when all those little girls are there. And I'm concerned about, you know, would you be renting this out at night to earn revenue for the school? That's my first concern. My second concern was when Judy brought up the sound study, it appeared to me that you were cutting corners and saying, well, we'll fix that once we realize it's a problem. Well, this is where we live, so I don't really want to take that approach. I recognize the fact that you're raising all this money and it's not a town project, but that doesn't, you know, I don't have any comfort saying, well, if it's a problem, we'll fix that when it comes. We'll do a sound study. We don't want to spend the money now. That's the impression I got. The third comment I wanted to make was in regard to Walter Sullivan. Looking at Resurrection, I'm on the parish council at Resurrection. From my understanding, the tennis courts, this is what I was told on parish council, are on Resurrection property. And there was an understanding between Resurrection and Notre Dame that there would be a reciprocity in that the tennis courts were built on Resurrection's property, so Resurrection was allowed to use NDA for religious education. Now, they also allowed Notre Dame to use Resurrection's parking lot as part of that agreement. With the collaboration between Resurrection and St. Paul's, there's going to be many changes that are going to be taking place. Is the religious ed going to be at St. Paul's when the two churches combine? Have you looked at that? Will we be having that same reciprocity? And if we're not, then where are all these cars going to park? We see the track events and we hear the guns, and you know, we understand that because it's a daytime thing, but I'm very concerned with the night, I'm very concerned with the parking, and I'm very concerned with the flow of the traffic. Because sometimes when I teach religious ed on a Wednesday, it can take me 30 minutes to get from Notre Dame to my home off of Gardner Street, unless, by the grace of God, a police officer comes and lets everybody out. But I mean, it can literally take up to 30 minutes to get out of there and get home. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ryan McManus. I live at 90 Gardner Street, which is right to the top of that picture there. The two areas of concern that I have, some of them have already been raised, but it's with respect to the details, how much light is going to come in. You know, being as close as I am, I can't imagine an 80-foot light pole, and I'm not sure exactly how many, but I can't imagine that there's not going to be a significant impact. I know you had said that it's going to, shine towards the school, and I'm not sure, maybe out towards the woods as well, but I have to imagine there's going to be some pretty significant light output. And so if there's not going to be, I would love to just see, but like some actual numbers on what does that mean for light. But, you just look at how close, and I think, I estimate, we're probably about 100 feet from the track. So it's some pretty impressive lights.
You'll be surprised. You got to believe. Now believe.
The second piece of information on that front that I'd love to just see more detail on is the sound. Today you mentioned the April track meet, and that's some pretty significant sound that comes through today, and that's portable speakers, and so I hear more amplified sound, and I also, that's sort of early in the morning, and it's different when it's sunny. I just think about sound at night, and I just think about that bouncing off the back of my house. And again, being so close, it feels like a very significant impact to me, to the neighborhood. The second area of concern, so that's more, I just want to get detail on what does this really mean, sound and light. I suspect it's significant. But the other part is the thing about how much more activity is going to happen there. Right now, there's not, daytime, afternoons, yes, we hear activity. But when I think about, we want to increase revenue streams to pay for this, it's going to be available 6 nights a week. I have a real uneasiness as to what does this really mean. And if it's 6 nights a week with the impacts that I think it's going to be from light and sound, that's a completely different environment that we live in. That's major, major impact. It's very close. And 9 o'clock at night, my kids are in bed at 7:30. So that's an hour and a half after they are in bed. Lights, sound going on in the backyard is significant. And so 6 nights a week to me is really, really troubling to think if that's the max and if that actually fills up. That's a really, really big concern for me. Those are my 2 areas.
Thank you, Ryan.
Just to answer the sound one, I do believe, and I don't know how many nights it is, it's restricted to just the NDA use. No rentals will be able to use the sound. Am I correct in that? So I don't know what that means, but just putting that out there.
I would just say, right now, I think that the usage of sound is somewhat limited. So again, I'd just like to get the details on what it is today and what that's moving towards.
I agree.
Gary, can I ask
Sure.
Ryan a question? How is the sound now? I understood it's during the day, but is it okay? Is it acceptable?
He's asking how the sound is now. I'm just trying to...
Yeah, when the portable sound that you mentioned is out there, it's very, you can hear it. It's perfectly... No, it's fine, I'm saying, because it's during the day and it's incredibly infrequent. And so, but that said, it echoes off the back of the house today. It's not as though it's a sound that you can hear in the distance. It's, you're sitting inside and you can hear it through the windows. And so I think about that getting louder, and it's not a small amount of sound that's coming through those portable speakers today.
And the reason I asked is sitting, listening, and taking Judy's comments in. Art and I just talked about setting them up and actually getting some readings and then having some comparisons. So we'll do that. That's why I asked.
And I would add to that, we have a memo from our real estate council about the Dover Amendment, and I'm not sure that you and she are in agreement on this protection to one-off organizations under the Dover Amendment.
All right, I'll speak with her.
Can I say something to address some of the concerns? I thought I might be able to help with allay some of the... Donna Brickley, the athletic director. And actually, I've been there for over 30 years, so I go way back on some of these questions. But I thought I'd help allay some of the fears for the board and for the neighbors with regard to projected use. There is no real projection to increase or enhance anything but the quality of time that our own student athletes can have to maximize and upgrade their time on the field and to really bring back one of our teams on campus. So when we're asking about, for instance, the 9 o'clock, That's really in an effort to be able to entertain our track team, which is about 120 kids, in the afternoon, our lacrosse program. And any rentals that we've done in my history have been very conservative. Our history started with being privileged enough to be guests of the town of Hingham, using a lot of the fields in the town of Hingham. So when it came time that we actually built our front field to bring our field hockey team back on campus, it was only natural for me to want to extend that opportunity to the likes of Hingham Soccer, Hingham Youth Soccer. And the select group that we talk about is a program for young women that is very much similar to our mission of bringing up these younger girls and, playing athletics. And so just to allay your fears, there would be no sound for the select group or for rentals afterwards. And our focus is on servicing our kids. Even the rentals that we have had on campus, as far as charging for what they come on campus for, it's minimal. It's been minimal. So please don't think that we're going to be going after. I don't want to extend my time, just like Margaret doesn't want to extend her time, being on campus any more than we have to. But we want to make a much better experience for our own girls, and that's all this is about. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we ask along those lines, there's a format that was developed on a usage plan for the high school, and I'm wondering, it's a schedule and conditions governing the use of the field lights and amplified sound. Could you put together a matrix that kind of delineates what those proposals are on a seasonal basis, which is what we reviewed for the high school? I thought it was a very helpful format. It helps kind of tie it down and set the guidelines. Well, you've got it right in front of me. It's very general. I was thinking, could we kind of expand on that? This is kind of very general. And then we really know what the guidelines are.
We will, and that's what I was getting at when I talked about trying to put more specificity on it for games when, for example, the evening games when they start, etc. So we'll definitely do that. And then, Judy, that Donna's answer has more to do with what I was getting at with, with the whole Dover, etc. So, for example, the things that they have now are related to their mission. If you actually look to their mission about, educating young women, etc., there's a lot of overlap. So I'll talk to Susan Murphy about that, and I'm sure you'll hear from both of us.
Great. Could I ask more butters or residents, interested people, to speak if you'd like?
I'm not in a butter.
Interested resident.
Well, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Lizzie Eldridge, 154 Union Street. I understand that every neighborhood's different, but in order to be fair to all neighbors across the town, why wouldn't you do some kind of a user policy, whether it's at the high school or here, that's equal so that every neighborhood has the same kind of treatment, that they're treated the same way? I mean, if you're expecting the high school to only use their fields 3 nights a week, lights to 8:30 or whatever it is, wouldn't you expect to treat another neighborhood the same way? I mean, it seems to me that whatever user policy or whatever you have for any of these fields, that they be the same so that the neighborhoods feel that they're treated equally and it doesn't pit one neighborhood against another.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great suggestion. I think we should, I think that was part of the detailed kind of usage plan, and to reconcile those usage plans. Sure, welcome.
Thank you. Kevin Concanon, live on 6 Windsong Way. I'm in a butter. Just want to comment on the detail, specifically relating to what I heard today, or the lack of. And the comment of, what's the standard that we're going to keep? I've participated in many of the other fields, and, just from obviously, this being a private school, it seems to be a different standard. The town doesn't truly benefit by this except for the private students. But yet we had higher standards at the public schools, and the town had to go through a lot of detail. And just to sit here and talk about trust and say, oh, have faith, believe. And I candidly, as a neighbor, I haven't seen that love. And I've seen the public schools have to go through a lot of this with their neighbors because they're a lot more vocal. And just because the numbers aren't here, I still think that the standards should be the same for all neighbors. We talk about, have they approached the butters? Well, I can tell you in my 7 years with kids, I try to go on the field, and I try to do sprinting and run on the track. I've been thrown out, myself personally, and with the kids, with their security people. They don't allow the public to necessarily be on the fields. Certainly, they might have their reasons and all that, but here I am as a public person, and this is in my backyard, and we talk about volumes of noise, but yet there's no details. And at the town, what are we going to benefit from the town by this? So I would ask the board to really hold the same standard across the board. My wife and I are just saying all the battles we've fought through for lights, filling up town halls and all this, and it's just like, oh, don't worry about it. The resurrection lights are projected this way. Oh, don't worry about it. Well, these lights aren't going to impact the neighbors. Don't worry about it. We're going to have until 9 o'clock. But we really don't really want till 9, but we want an open checkbook. Just because it's private, I don't feel we should continue to just have an open checkbook. So I'd ask the board just to have the same standards across the board, very high standards. And also from a neighbor perspective, what are they going to do for the town as well? And is it going to be an open facility or is it a closed facility? If the high school might need something, are we going to be open to the community? I don't think they are right now as a private institution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just say one thing about that? Is tonight's just the first night of our hearings, and as anybody who witnessed the high school fields permitting process knows, we do spend a lot of time looking at the project from the neighbor's standpoint, and the applicant will have a lot more opportunity to talk about kind of landscaping and the exact direction of the lights and things like that. So bear with us if you can come back, because we will talk about it some more.
One of the things also that was helpful in our early discussions 2 or 3 years ago on the high school field is that we did get a modeling of the lighting so that we could see exactly what the lighting was on the abutters, so that we had something that would quantify it, and it would be in tangible terms. I think I'd like to ask for the same thing relative to the sound at the lot lines, because we really can't have the sound at the lot lines be greater than, I forget what the number is, but just to, in this process, it would quantify what all of these design ramifications are, so we're not guessing at it. I think that would be very helpful, and it would be helpful, I think, to reassure the abutters and the neighbors.
I do think we want to reduce that spill in the wetlands because that has an impact on our wildlife.
If I can respond, maybe 2 weeks. If you haven't seen what the photometrics look like, when I say don't worry about it, the science, it's very well developed. It's really quite amazing how limited the spill is because of these lights and how it's done. So when I say that, I don't mean to be flip, but don't worry about it. I know where Windsong is. I'm pretty confident in the numbers. It's good technology. It'll be interesting if you haven't seen it before.
Jeff, it might be helpful to have, I don't know if this is easy or hard, but to just get the high school fields and kind of how close were the houses on Downing and Union, sort of, and so that these neighbors could talk to those neighbors and say, I'm 20 feet, I'm 100 feet, whatever, what's your experience been? Because you guys do have the advantage that people have lived through a year and a half of this now.
Right. I think that's a good idea.
Any more comments? Neighbors, abutters? Interested?
See you in 2 weeks?
Excellent. So I think we probably should, if
I don't know about 2 weeks.
Yeah, I don't think it's 2 weeks, but it's, we probably should schedule the next meeting, because for the...
How does 7 o'clock on May 11th work for the board and for the applicant? I know Jeff Dirk is available that night.
That'd be good. It'd be good to hear Jeff's presentation.
He's reviewing the traffic, Jeff?
He's available on the 11th. He's holding it.
What else do we have on the 11th?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Sounds
Stay
good.
tuned.
So 7 o'clock?
So we would need a written request, and we would need the board to vote on it if it's okay with the applicants. You'll give us,
Do May 11th at 7 o'clock.
Could you put together a little
Written request?
freehand request?
and if the board can vote on the request.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. And
Gary, we have to vote on the.
yes, I just wanted to, before you left, just vote on the request.
Sarah, can we just stay while we vote for just this one request?
But we have to get, we're just going to get.
No bourbon, eh, Sarah? Yes. Is it going to, is Resurrection still going to have a resident pastor and priest, or is it going to be? Okay, I thought he was more permanent. Okay. I remember. Thanks. Appreciate it, John.
10 years ago.
I know.
I mean, there's no priest.
I remember Father Mooney when he was there.
Well, you know what happened? This guy from East Boston, Father Allen.
Yeah.
They didn't like Hingham people.
Oh, really?
Too rich and spoiled.
Okay, so he didn't want to.
Insulted them all. And
He insulted them? Oh.
And they gave him a E-ball when they
Yeah.
passed that father again. But,
Is there going to be a primary, secondary in this parish arrangement, or both equal?
it's going to be 1-3, because that's the thing, is like, this is commercial.
Well, I heard the same thing. Thanks, Jeff.
So,
I think what I'd like to do. Oh, Sarah's back. So if we could, while the applicant's still here, we just want to schedule a vote for the extension. The extension on behalf of Notre Dame Academy has, Jeff has requested a continuance to May 11th at 7 p.m. And I'd like any discussion on that, or would someone like to second that motion?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. See you on the 11th. I heard the same thing, and I don't know whether there's something else in Hill.
We're still live.
Okay, all right.
We still have other business.
That's okay. Let's continue.
So,
Are we all present and accounted for?
so,
Present but not accounted for?
should we just tell folks?
Accounted for and not present. Oh, there she is. Where's Sarah? Yeah, we have to continue, folks, so. You could pass that to Mary Judy. Thank you.
Can you stamp that in, and then that's for the file? I also need to make a copy of somebody's, that legal size handout that Margaret gave out.
And we just wanted to see if you knew about it.
Oh, here it is here.
I need a copy for the file, and I.
So here's, you know what? I, for some reason, have two. Here's one of these, and you need this,
I just need the big one.
and you have the abutters list. Don't you need this little one? Isn't this an update?
I have one. I just-
Oh, you have one?
I just didn't get.
Oh, take that, sure. No problem.
You could stamp it in for the file.
Okay, wonderful.
So I know
So what's next?
So I know that it's late, but for the board, I didn't know, I need to talk to each of you about preparing for town meeting, and that's it's your discretion what we cover, but I wanted to at least touch base with you on town meeting. Sure. I mean, you have other stuff on the agenda, though, so it's the board's discretion what you want to cover next.
Well, I think one of the things I might suggest is that there was just as a point of clarification, there was an earlier request when I presented to the advisory committee from Mary Power that she thought the different boards were going to give an introductory kind of presentation. And this was in the context of our earlier presentation to the advisory committee. What I've heard subsequently is that it probably makes better sense as we've reviewed these, and the original intent was not to take away from any of the individual board members' presentations. It was just a kind of a introductory piece. But my sense is I don't think the other committees are doing that, so it may be, your point is well taken in terms of our thoughts in the last week. I think it's probably best to, I agree with you, that we should have the individual board members who want to present would be the lead on each article,
and as the articles come up, we're not doing them in groups, as the articles come up singly, each zoning article comes up singly, separately, then it's very, it's probably the best way is the person who is fielding that article to present. I guess the question is, do we do a short presentation, or do we just entertain questions? That came up earlier, and I'm just trying to get at what's the best way to do it.
I think it seems to me we base it on lots of different things. What's going on at town meeting, how complicated the article is initially, and there are some that will absolutely need explanations. Others, such as housekeeping ones, don't necessarily need to have a presentation, but you also sometimes can tell that by what's going on prior to it at town meeting. What time of night it is, where people seem to be at in terms of their need for specificity. So I think we should be prepared to present every article and then not necessarily do that. There's some I think we absolutely have to do. I think the height exception one we'll have to do.
Yes.
And I think there's a couple others I think them.
Now, on Article 1, on the height exception, because it's an initiative petition, the authors of that petition will have a representative who would probably open.
Yeah.
So
then we would follow, I think, with a recommendation from the planning board. In that case, I think we would have to speak, yes.
I thought that the summary that you put together on each of the articles was very good. And I'm wondering, is that something that could be the basis of how we approach it with all of us? I mean, I thought it was...
So I have a couple thoughts. So what Gary's talking about, these are summaries of each article, and I'm providing them to each of you just so that you're all aware if, God forbid, someone doesn't come that night and someone has to pinch hit. I think there's value in that. I do need to tell advisory who's going to present on each article, and so I'd like to get a feeling from you if you're definitely going to make a presentation on your article. For the height exception one, the citizen will be making a presentation, and then the person that's covering that, which is Sarah, would then have a presentation. And for the zoning board articles, the planning board representative, if you were going to speak on it, you would make your presentation, but the zoning board at their meeting of April 22nd is going to talk about this, and they're going to have someone on point. So if a lot of technical questions come up, it's the article that they proposed, they're going to be ready and available to get up and respond to citizen questions that, you're not on your own on those, especially where they propose them. So they're going to be there to back you up. The intent of asking people if you would get up and give like a who, what, where, why, and when on each article is just to try to avoid confusion. That being said, it's the board's discretion. So if there's certain articles that you feel don't need a response unless there's questions, please tell me. My other question for each of you, and you can answer me individually, is should we, and I think it would be good, get together and kick around the articles that each of you have, where we can do some devil's advocate and talk about the presentation, and if you have any questions, I can answer them for you, and just kind of like a prep session for town meeting. And I have one scheduled already, but I'm available to do that. And I think sometimes questions come out of the, where you don't even expect them on an article. So sometimes we do that sometimes preparing for a contentious hearing. We say, okay, what could somebody possibly say? How would we respond? So I put that out there for all of you, and I'm happy to be as flexible as you want, if that's helpful for you.
One of the things that I saw that was very informative is when we presented the articles to the advisory committee, people who understand the language of setbacks and the definitions, a verbal explanation works just fine. For example, if we're talking about the commercial uses, which is the idea of the 40-foot versus the 35-foot setback in the industrial district for veterinary uses. Now, that was, I thought, relatively easily understood in a verbal description, because we were talking about a dimension from a lot line to the side yard or the rear yard, so it was easily communicated, and I thought easily understood. And then it was also clear to also say in that what the setback was to a residential district, because the thing that most people would key in on is if I had a house next to this district, what would it be? So that made it, kind of brought it home. So that was just my sense of what I saw there. Now, what I also saw was on Article 1, where you're talking about something that's more of a performance criteria, where you've got a height restriction, which in some respects is two-dimensional, but where that applies on the building is three-dimensional, and how do you explain that? What I learned from the presentation at the Selectmen's meeting is that we have a diagram in the back of the zoning bylaw which explains the average grade. And we thought, well, maybe a diagram would explain it. Well, sometimes a diagram asks more questions or opens more doors than it answers. So I don't know if a diagram, I'm just thinking out loud, I don't know if a diagram is a better way to explain it, or is the better way to explain it where you basically put a kind of a verbal construct together saying that, for example, it's a certain percentage of the top floor. The top floor is the rectangle or square that we use to measure the basis of this, where it applies on the roof. It's not on the sloped roof plane. It's on a horizontal cut through the roof at a certain point above grade.
So do you think it would be helpful to have this meeting where we go through these things, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I'm just going on and on. I tend to.
Usually with each one of
I think it's a good
articles
idea.
that you're covering.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea,
When can we do that? When do we have an availability?
I'm at your service, so I could do it. If we're going to meet individually, like I'm meeting with Judy
On Friday.
on Friday, we have a meeting set up, and Judy and Emily and I invited Linda to sit in on that. Because Linda is our liaison, I don't know if she can come, but as we're talking through it, she may provide
We
other
can all
insights.
talk about which piece we're going to cover, and I like doing it with Emily, because it's a zoning board this one is a zoning board article. And so, you know, who stands up for a second, third, if we have to. It doesn't, you know, the one that I'm doing is pretty much building commissioner specific, but somebody from Baker Hill might have clued into it, because it really kind of talks about that kind of a project. And might have questions about it, so.
I think it's important to be prepared.
Oh, yeah.
And then hopefully we'll be over-prepared. So for Sarah, you have the height restrictions article.
Yeah.
And then you have the cell tower one.
All right, I'll set up a meeting time with you.
Okay.
I think it's almost better that way than the whole board meeting, because then you could do the cross-discipline preparation.
All right,
I think.
I'll be in touch. And then, Walter, you've got the easy one. I don't want to jinx you.
I know.
No pressure.
I'm still smarting from last year on the body art.
Oh, the tattoo?
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
And I think Bill Ramsey has indicated to me that he feels very comfortable with
He
his.
is prepared.
And so I may not actually meet with him because he feels comfortable. I'm extending the offer to him.
You could probably explain it better than any of us, so.
And that's kind of that's a fairly straightforward one, too. So if you want to just talk to me, each of you offline, really, I'm at your service.
All right.
Thank you.
And then we're going to meet before town meeting at 6 o'clock at the high school as usual.
Which is next 2 Mondays.
April 27th, 2 Mondays from now.
27th, wow.
And nothing else is scheduled for that agenda unless the board might decide to handle some of these minutes. You know, I could maybe, just
well,
to
I mean, I guess we could post it, but it's pretty, we might have time.
It's just town meeting prep was what I was going to post.
Yeah, exactly.
But we might as well approve the minutes that night, too.
Right, we'll all be
If we have time,
I'll put it on, you can always continue it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can always bump them, how's that?
And then we'll have 10 minutes to do in one meeting.
Okay, the other thing I just want to hand out to you, and you can take it home, and if you have questions, let me know. Back when Three Pond Park was before you last, remember, they put in a CrossFit in there, they put in a rock climbing gym, and they had a brewery in there. The last time they were before you, they said, we have ample parking, we need to go out and restripe the lot. And the board had requested that once they restripe the lot, they provide an updated map with a parking count. because prior to when they filled their last space. So I recently got that submittal in compliance with their promise to you. I'd like to distribute it to you. They have an auto parts store that they'd like to lease out the remaining space to. It's a warehouse distribution, it's not a...
Does the chart indicate that they have ample parking as we thought?
That's not a retail.
And without discussing, I mean, we don't have an application before us, so that's kind of, I don't want to go too far outside the scope of what we said we're going to talk about, but I wanted to distribute this to you, and to read it over.
In a little convergence of planning board permits, a couple of weeks ago, I sampled the Bradford Distillery vodka at Ralph's Spirits on, 3A.
And what was your conclusion?
Recommendation.
I would recommend you sample it, but I just thought it was really nice that these two businesses that we had permitted sort of came together like that in this very lovely way. Yes.
Did they have a grand opening, by the way?
Who?
The distillery?
No, they're
Because they don't really take the public in there.
no, they don't. They're not prepared to take it to the
Yeah,
public.
but hopefully they'll expand, right? Isn't that-
Tongue in cheek, you know.
So this was just an information, so after you read it tomorrow or the next day, if you have questions, let me know.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, cool.
Excellent.
All right.
Are we
done?
good? Are we ready to adjourn? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Good meeting.
All right.
Good meeting.